Good evening, everyone. 7:02, I'm going to call the meeting to order. March 26, 2024, Bridgewater Township Zoning Board of Adjustment. It's a regular meeting. Both adequate and electronic notice of this meeting specifying the time, place, and manner in which such notice was provided in accordance with the Open Public Meeting Act, NJSA 10:4-6. Specifically, on January 9, 2024, proper notice was sent to the Courier News and the Star Ledger and filed with the clerk at the Township of Bridgewater and posted on the Municipal Bulletin Board. Please be aware of the Zoning Board of Adjustment policy for public hearings. No new applications will be heard after 9:30, and no new testimony will be taken after 10 p.m. If you're able, please rise for the salute to the flag.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, Joanne. Good to have you here. Could we have a roll call, please? Here.
Yeah.
Here.
Here. Here.
Here.
Here. Here.
All right, thank you very much. We have a quorum. All right, at this point of the meeting, I'm going to open up to members of the public that would like to speak on any land use issue that is not on our agenda this evening. Seeing none, I'm going to close that portion. We have no minutes for approval tonight, and we have one resolution that's appointing our new board planner, Catherine Sarmad, looking to the board for changes and comments on the resolution to appoint a new planner.
Mr. Chairman, I do think we need to just correct the secretary name.
Absolutely.
Other than that, I don't have anything.
All right. So one change. Can I get a nomination, please?
I'll nominate.
All right. Can I have a second?
Second.
That was Mr. Gajewski?
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Can I have a roll call vote, please, Joanne?
Sure. Ms. Lynn? Yes, yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Congratulations, welcome. We've ruined your Tuesdays for the next year.
The other one.
All right, Rich, we have a couple of adjournments and postponements. Why don't we go through them real quick?
Sure. So the application for CX Towers, which is on the agenda, if anyone from the public is here for that matter, it's not being heard this evening. That is being adjourned until May 28th, and the applicant will provide new notice for that application.
And that's it?
That's it for that. Yep.
All right, so we have 3 President's Drive. Who's here from, come on down. Left side or your right. And let me make sure I get your last name right. Razakowski? All right, Razakowski family, welcome. Why don't you tell us why you're here? Tell us what you're seeking from the board and maybe take us through your project and...
I'll sit down.
Sure. And before you do that, if are you both going to testify?
I think I'll be on the mic.
Right? Well, yeah, okay. Whoever's going to testify, just stand up, raise your hand, please.
Sure.
You solemnly swear that the testimony you will give to this board will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. And just for the record, would you state your full name, please?
Neil Ruskowski.
Thank you.
All right, so we recently purchased on President's Drive. We've been living in Bridgewater for about, I'd say, close to 10 years now. My wife's grew up here, went through the whole school system. She's a teacher at the high school. We literally moved a couple blocks over. Plan to stay here, through retirement, hopefully. Taxes stay reasonable. We've been here, so I said, we've been here for about a year, and right now there's no real outdoor storage on the property. I had to put up a little 6x6 vinyl shed. In our last house, we had ample storage for the pool. I got another kid, he's actually at lacrosse right now, but we have a lot of stuff, and when we were using the pool this summer, we realized we had nowhere to put it. The previous owner was keeping pool equipment in the gazebo, so we decided that while they're young, we want to build a structure where we can kind of house all their stuff, while all their bikes and their equipment and stuff. And then we went to get a survey done, and we found out that we're actually at or over our improvement coverage. I guess with the house, the driveway, and the pool, there's really no allowance to build anything else. So here we are now, asking for a variance for I guess, lot coverage.
Less than 1%, right, what you're seeking?
Less than 1% increase. So right now, like we want to build into the existing concrete that's on the pool. There's a little mulch bed between the driveway and the pool. So that mulch bed is something that we're looking to cover over with concrete, but everything else will be, we're kind of taking it from the concrete space right now. That's next to the pool.
Did you get a copy of the March 21st letter that's from our planner and from our engineer?
Yes, yeah, I have.
They had some questions in there, and I think if you were able to address them, and I know they also had some questions on some,
Yes, I have notes for each
they
one
wanted
of
to do
the.
some calculations that they didn't have all the information on. So maybe you want to walk through that,
Sure,
and then maybe when you're done, you want to just walk us through some of the renderings?
sure.
Okay, great.
So for number one, with the floor to air ratio, so it wasn't on Mr. Mance's survey, but I did include it on, there's a form number 4 that has the calculations for floor to area. I think the allowance is 15%. I put us around 9% for floor to area. So if you look at the application, there's form number 4 for the calculation for that. For number 2, the question was the height of the structure. I was aware that the maximum height is 16 feet. So in the plans, if you look at, I think on page 9 of the actual plans, which I'll walk through, it is set to 16 feet. So that is in there. For number 3, in terms of concrete equipment pads, so on the actual survey, there is a line item for concrete equipment pads, which is included in the calculation for lot coverage. It's 22 square feet for the concrete pads. So if you look at the table in the kind of middle of the survey, it's the third item down. Oh, sorry, 4th item down, concrete equipment pad. So that is included in the calculation. For number 4, the question is around, like, are there any options, or have I thought about any options to kind of reduce the current lot coverage? I mean, there's only really 2 options. It's either remove existing concrete, or like remove the gazebo, or tear up my driveway. I don't have any accessories. I mean, there's a vinyl shed which will be removed because that's housing my mower right now. So it's either cut square footage off the concrete, or tear up my driveway. But it has Belgian blocks, so I really don't want to tear up my driveway. It's pavers. So if it's a deal breaker, I'd be willing to, I guess cut the back end of my concrete on my pool decking if I can get us to like a net zero change. I'd hope not to have to do that, because then I'd have to remove it, put back some landscaping and whatnot. But again, if I'm a reasonable person. If that's what it takes to get the deal done, I'll cut the concrete. I mean,
I don't think the board's, I think you just want to put that on the record, and we can come back to that if
Okay,
necessary.
sure,
All right,
sorry.
thank you.
in terms of utilities, there will only be electrical. There will be no heat or air conditioning. It's not a living space. There's already electrical that's run out for the pool system. There's an extra circuit there, so I plan on just tapping into that. It's just going to be to power the lights, really.
Repeat for the board, there'll be no water, no plumbing.
No water, no plumbing. It's not a living space. It'll just be electrical.
Thank you.
And then in terms of, the big question was, there's on the plans, there's 2 accessory structures right now. I have a little 6x6 vinyl shed that I had to put in because I had to put my mower, and there's a gazebo. The vinyl shed will be taken down. I mean, it's a little, thing I bought on Marketplace. Ultimately, there will be 2 accessory structures, unless you guys ask me to take down the gazebo. And then the question was around exterior lighting. There's going to be 4 sconces, 3 facing the driveway, so kind of 1, 2, 3 spread out, and then 1 on the side door. So that's going to be all the exterior lighting. I mean, no floodlights or anything, just little accent lights to keep it pretty. And then obviously everyone's big question is around runoff. So the other items, number 1, if you take a look at the plans in my survey, on the whole southern portion of the property, there's a huge U-shaped drainage swale. That was put in by the previous owner. And actually, the neighbor also has that put in. It's all tied together. So the drainage swale actually exits into a drainage easement that's neighboring my neighbor's property. So the way it works is there's probably like 6 to 8 inches of what would you call it? Recessed, I don't know, backfilled stone. So it's to help really slow down the runoff and help percolate. It's around the whole southern portion of the property. My backyard is a slight slope, so everything kind of hits that drainage swale, and slowly it gets absorbed, and whatever extra kind of runs off into the drainage easement. So my plan was to tie in the gutters directly into that drainage swale. Right now, there's an existing pipe next to the pool equipment that actually goes all the way, the exits at the drainage swale. So my plan was to tie in the gutters on the pool house to go directly into that drainage swale. So there shouldn't be any runoff that's actually hitting the neighbor's property at all, because it'll all be captured and kind of pushed into the swale to help absorb into the ground. The one thing that I did want to mention in terms of runoff, the southern and southwestern portion of the pool area, the concrete decking, it's all surrounded by essentially river rock. So any water that comes off the concrete around the pool kind of hits the river rock, slows down, helps with some absorption, and then it goes into the swale. So it's not just like mulch; it's just stone everywhere. Kind
You
of.
have plantings in that?
There's planting, there's shrubbery, there's trees, there's a lot of mature landscaping there, and none of that's being removed. It's all existing. So there's one concern about potentially needing a grading plan. There is grading on the actual survey around the whole impacted area. From corner to corner, I think there's a 5 to 6 inch change in elevation. The section where I'm putting the pool houses is really flat. I mean, it's flat with the driveway, flat with the pool. There's really not much slope there. So the survey does include elevation around that area. And I think that's everything that I noted.
What is the floor area ratio?
For the whole property, it's 9.01.
9.01.
Yeah. The zoning is 15.
Basically tell us what you're seeking from the board, it looks like some bulks you need. Why don't you just walk the board through what you need here?
The main variance I'm looking is for improved lot coverage. The mention of bulk was, I guess, was brought up because Mr. Burr had noticed that there's 2 accessory structures. He might need another variance for having 3 structures, but the temporary sheds indicated as temporary on the survey. That will be removed because I'll be able to put my mower in the garage.
Thank you. Board questions?
I have a question.
Please, Mrs. Anand.
Where is the pool equipment located? Pump?
It's directly to the left of the pool.
Just
So it's
outside?
actually, it's going to be to the left of the pool house. So the pool house kind of shield some of the pool equipment from our view. So if you see there's a little concrete slab there at the end of this little walkway that's going to be removed, that's where the pool equipment is. Kind of where it says 147.5.
It's not inside that,
It won't be inside the building, no. It's existing, none of that's going to be disrupted.
Anyone else on the board? Board professionals?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So just a couple of quick questions. With regard to the concrete pads, the reason I raise that as a question is I know Jim Mance on his plan showed the concrete pool equipment slab next to the pool house where it's proposed to be situated. What I didn't see was the air conditioning pads and the generator pad and looks like there's 3 or 4 different concrete pads on the far side.
They're not listed, they're not sitting on concrete.
They're not concrete?
No, there's one generator that's just on the gravel. The air conditioners, I think they're on plastic trays, if you want to call them that.
They're not on concrete, but
They're not on concrete.
they're still technically structures. That's the reason I raised that. I just want to make sure that you have an accurate portrayal of all the coverage that's on the property. In the future, you want to do something else, you have an accurate baseline. So that's why I raised that question. Let me see. Yeah, so the deck was correctly not included. Okay. And the pool house itself that's being proposed, so 22 by 22 structure, the front portion that faces the driveway is going to be used for equipment, for lawn equipment and kids'
Storage, kids' stuff, yeah.
storage.
Yep.
And the only part of it that's technically considered a pool house, is that it's a covered porch? Is there any interior space that's going to be used for the pool house?
Well, the storage area is going to be the,
So they're gonna
yeah,
kinda-
yeah, I mean,
gonna
there's essentially like a French door that opens up, so I can bring all my pool equipment into the storage area. And then the covered patio is really just entertaining space.
Okay. And then I did raise it because with lot coverage variances, one of the issues that we look at is what the drainage impact is going to be. I know 290 square feet is rather modest, especially for a property like this. I think it measures about an acre. So that's why I raised the question of, is there an opportunity to remove any existing hardscape to kind of either lessen that relief that's being requested, or frankly eliminate it altogether. I understand you have a block driveway that's bound by Belgian block curb. The pool patio, there is an opportunity there if necessary to shave some of that down, but would it impact the usability of the pool in any way, or the pool patio? Is that going to cause you a hardship if you were to have to take some out?
The hardship would be obviously the financial burden and just the disruption. I mean, I'm not going to have the clean lines I had before. I'm going to have a nice sharp cut. So that's really it. But I mean, in usability now, we'll still be able to use the decking. I mean, we'll make it work. Honestly, for us, the storage and the structure is more important than the patio.
And in the time that you've lived there, the year that you guys have lived there, the drainage swale in the back of the property, have you ever seen that filled up with water to the point where it really raises to a higher level, or is it
No,
generally pretty dry? Anything
the
that flows
previous
through
owner, I think a year or two prior, actually had the whole drainage swale redug and cleaned up. So it's been working very well.
Okay. And last question deals with landscaping. I guess there's some plants that would need to come down in the area where the pool house is proposed. Are you planning to replace them, put more plants anywhere else, or did you have any plans for kind of
Yes. So right now there's a row of these little mini trees. Knowing how expensive landscaping is, I actually want to replant them along the fence line on the right side of the plans, because I don't want to buy new trees. But yeah, I plan on maintaining those trees, and we have some those decorative tall grasses. That's all going to be replanted around the property.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're good?
I'm good. Bill just took all my comments.
He does that, doesn't he? Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, comments on the drawing that he has. The board secretary is not Scarlett Doyle. You'll have to change the name to Gary Lespice on the drawing here.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the comment.
Yeah,
Signature box.
Yes.
where the signature block is,
Andrew Fresco.
Oh, okay.
it is Gary
It was
Lespice.
prepared last year, so,
And same thing here.
okay. I can have them all redone.
Thank you, Mr.
Now, just one thing with respect to the placement of the pool equipment. Can you confirm that it'll be inside of and not violate the side yard setback?
The pool equipment?
Yeah.
So the pool equipment currently exists, so it's not being moved.
I thought you said you were putting it next, on the opposite side of the pool house.
I just meant that's the current positioning. So there's that little kind of concrete slab on the left side of the pool house next to the number 1475. That's the concrete slab where the pool equipment is sitting right now. So that's going to remain untouched. It's kind of hidden behind some shrubs right now.
And it's within the side yard setback?
Yes.
Thank you. Members of the public, questions on any of the testimony you've heard? All right, seeing none, do you want to wrap it up, or you good with your testimony?
I think that's everything I have. Sorry, first time, so.
I'm going to reopen it to members of the public that would like to speak for or against this application. All right, seeing none, I'm going to open it up to Rich, first off, to go through the variances that we need. It sounds like there's one.
So it's just one variance, and that is the maximum improved lot coverage. He's seeking 25.9%, which is 10,367 square feet. It currently occupied 10,078 square feet at 25.2%, so it's just a 0.7% increase. That's the only variance. The others are not, the other items raised here are not variances.
All right, thank you. Mr. Kulak, why don't we open up deliberations with you, sir?
I think the request is reasonable, and I think it adds to the overall, what's the right word, ambiance of the property itself, and lends itself well to the existing use of a family pool and having some additional storage. So I would be supportive of your application.
Thank you. Mr. Sweeney?
The only thing that jumped out at me was the lot coverage statistic. I mean, it's well over what's allowed today, and you're increasing it, granted, by a small amount. You've explained why you really don't want to make any offsets anywhere else on the property, so I'm okay with that, and overall, I'm in favor of granting the application.
Thank you. Mrs. Amin?
It's a very simple variance, only one item here, and even that is not too much increase, so I'm in favor of approving it.
Mr. Fresco?
You know, some people say we're a tough board, but, 0.7%, there's no neighbors here. It looks like a nice structure, so I'm inclined to support it.
Thank you. Mr. Gajewski?
Yeah, had it been 0.8, you might have had a problem, but, yeah, I think it's perfectly reasonable and enjoy it.
Messier?
I have no problem with this application. I think the proposed structure lends itself well to the property. I think increases the overall property as well.
Thank you. I'm in agreement with my fellow board members. I'm going to vote in favor. And with that, I would seek a motion to approve the one variance that's being sought.
I'll make a motion.
Mr. Fresco, can I have a second, please?
Second.
Mr. Gajewski was the second. And Joanne, whenever you're ready, if we could roll call vote.
Yes? Yes?
Yes.
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 Yes?
Yes.
Yes. All right, enjoy.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. I
Did a
really
great
appreciate
job.
it.
Thank you very much for.
Let you guys over when we're done.
That's the easiest one we've had in a couple of years. All right, Chimney Rock Storage. You are next. Knee surgery. Mr. Milnick, right?
That's right, Chair.
Good to see you, sir.
See everyone. Good evening. Thanks for having us. I'm going to give a couple minutes for Mr. Winters to set up his computer, so we have exhibits all set up.
Do we have microphones for everyone?
This one, I think, is what I'll use. This one's right here. Ready, Mr. Chairman?
Ready when you are.
All right, well, thank you for having us again this evening. Again, we are Chimney Rock Associates LLC. It's our third time before you, and this is the third version of the plans we have testified before you on. As the board will recall, we were last here in 2023 and came back in January with significant revisions to the plan that we felt improved the overall layout, mitigated a lot of the variance relief that was being sought from the original application. At the January hearing, we presented the testimony of Matt Lang, who is the operator. Mr. Winters, of course, testified as well, and we began the testimony of the architect. And through that process, as well as some of the comments we heard from the board, even further analysis was made to try to improve what the board was viewing in terms of the building footprint, the gross floor area, the stormwater, the landscaping, and that resulted in what we submitted to you a couple of weeks back with respect to the application. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to start with Mr. Winters again, who's going to walk the board through the changes that were made in the most recent version. And I think what you'll hear is some significant movement in terms of the size of the building, reducing both the footprint and the square footage by approximately 20%, improving the stormwater beyond what your ordinance and the state requires to a point where it's actually going to reduce impervious coverage, which is something we couldn't say before. From the original application to now, hundreds of new plantings, both in terms of actual trees as well as shrubs, reduced pavement coverage, but I don't want to steal Mr. Winters' thunder, but this is all to say we believe the plan in front of you is a significant upgrade over what was previously provided. The variance list, when we originally applied for this, as the chairman noted at that first hearing, was in the 20s. We've reduced that by approximately half. We're down, and some of the variances we're still seeking have been mitigated in terms of their intensity. So we're excited to present this plan tonight. We'll start with Mr. Winters, who has previously been sworn in, and I will remind is under oath, and I will pass the mic to him.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Malenik. Good evening, Chair, board members. Pleasure to be back. As referenced in the opening, following our prior hearings and consideration of the comments received from the board and their professionals, and as well as the public, we worked with the applicant to prepare and submit revised plans, which we believe are substantially change and improve the site as was proposed. And in the process of that, we are resolving several non-compliant items. So I'd like to just give a brief summary of some of these changes, and then like to, at that point, then transition into a discussion about the variances and the non-compliances, the ones we've eliminated, several that we are improving upon that still require variances, but the relief is not as significant, and then give a kind of full accounting on where that stands so we can take care of that, because there's a lot of little things that changed, and I just want to make sure it's clear for the board's benefit. So with that, I want to introduce an exhibit right now, which is going to need a number. So I'm going to put that up on the screen.
That's what I have, yep, A5. Mr. Winters, just before you get too far into that one, would you just describe what A5 is in particular for the record, please?
Certainly. So this is a color rendering of the site plan. It is titled Site Plan Rendering, Chimney Rock Self-Storage, dated March 25, 2024. And this is, one moment, I'm trying to put this to full screen here. There, hopefully that's a little bigger for everyone to see. This is very similar to an exhibit we presented previously, but it's depicting the most recent version of the site plan and the landscaping plan, which we've done a color rendering of on top of an aerial mapping of the surroundings. So you'll see the site lot line is outlined in red along Route 22 to our south, Donahue Road to the north, just to orient you on that. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit so we could see where the changes and where the site improvements are for the benefit of everybody here. So among the changes, the biggest change with this application really is that we've reconfigured and reduced the building footprint somewhat significantly. This footprint is 20% smaller than the one we had on our original plans. With that footprint reduction, since every floor is reduced, we also have a total reduction of about 20% in the gross floor area of the building. We had 129,897 square feet of gross floor area in the original application. We've reduced that now to 103,887 square feet. So again, that's a sizable reduction in that building. With that, we've pulled the footprint in. We've kind of squared off the building in places. So what you'll see is there's pretty much more landscaping on the site around the perimeter of the building where it used to be building. On the west side of the building, this is area that's been reduced from the building footprint. Along the front of the building, we've kind of set the building back a little bit so it's not one uniform wall along the frontage, along the main drive aisle. And that goes with us trying to make the inside of the building a little more efficient. I'll let the architect talk about the building. But we've also cut back and provided more distance to the Donahue side by squaring off this building in the back. So those are some changes related to that. We've reconfigured the parking lot to make it a little more efficient with this. In the course of that, we recognized the reduction in building meant we could reduce the number of parking spaces we needed to serve this building. So the great benefit of these changes is it's led to a net reduction in impervious cover on the lot. And that's not just compared to what we proposed originally, but we have a net reduction in impervious cover over the existing conditions. So our project now proposes to reduce what's out there compared to the current condition in terms of impervious coverage. As I noted, we've taken advantage of the reduced footprint to increase our landscape on the site, and with that, we have additional landscaping intended to meet the various municipal requirements. And as I said, we're improving certain places where we need relief, where we're not maybe meeting all the standards, but we're improving them. Along the Donahue Road side of the property, for example, we still have a minimum 25-foot width on the landscape buffer on the northeast corner, but that actually gets wider as you go from east to west along the plan, as much as almost 48 feet on this side. So this is allowing us to do more things on this side of the property, and in particular, we're happy to report that we could preserve an additional 9 existing trees along the Donahue Road side. These are mature, grown trees, evergreens, deciduous. You could actually see we identify these in the white outline in this corner. So those are just going to help support and enrich the buffer that we're providing on this side, which is already going to be wider. We're still providing a compliant number of plantings. We're just shifting them into the site a little bit more to further enhance this buffer on this side with preservation of those trees. As noted in our original testimony, we provided a wider fire access lane, which was a requirement and a request of the fire marshal, and that's still on the plan. We've just moved it in further from Donahue so it stays closer to the building, again, to enhance and widen the buffer along the rear. Other changes we've made since the original submission, we have revised the site lighting locations and fixture selections along the Route 22 side of the building and the fire access lane. I'll provide some more details of those in a little bit. We have modified our stormwater management design. We're providing additional storage volume, and we're enhancing the stormwater controls to provide additional reductions above and beyond the minimums required. And again, I'll provide some more detail of that in a little bit. We're eliminating the freestanding trash enclosure. That was something that was talked about previously in testimony, but it's demonstrated on this plan. We initially had it in the parking area. We testified that we'd handle trash and recycling internal to the building. That's already been discussed, so just for record, that's now part of this plan. We've eliminated that. Minor but also important, we've increased the setback for the freestanding site ID sign, so that way we meet that requirement. And that's at the southeast corner near the main entrance. And we've provided wider parking spaces to meet the township standard width. So that's a summary, and if you'll forgive me, there might be a little repeat as I go through on how this affects the variances, but I just want to be complete for the board's benefit.
And Paul, before you go on to the next topic, I want to hammer on some of these issues that you talked about. So one issue you talked about is a reduction in the impervious coverage, not from our original application, but the existing condition. So let's put numbers to that. The existing conditions impervious coverage is about what, and what are the current conditions going to be?
We had approximately 1.5 acres of impervious cover on the existing site, and this whole site is about 3.44 acres. We're reducing that to approximately 1.36 acres now with this improvement. So we're reducing about 0.14 acres. It's a little more than 6,000 square feet. And that area, we're able to make pervious and landscape surfaces. And that's important because impervious surface generates more stormwater runoff, and that reduction is going to help with the additional reductions we're providing through our stormwater design.
So reduction from 1.5 to 1.36, about 10% reduction in the impervious coverage over existing conditions, correct?
Yes.
Okay. To me, the biggest change when I look at this exhibit that we've identified as A5 is clearly the change in color from that access road around the building from black to green. I know you're going to go into this, but maybe you can touch on why that color has changed.
That's actually a good time to bring that up, and I like that order better when I had it, so thank you. To clarify for the board's benefit, I wanted to explain the fire road. The product we've selected for this is actually it's a high-impact matrix product which has a maximum void area. What that means is it's pretty much a web. Once it's installed, most of this, more than 90% of the surface is a void area which is filled in with topsoil. Now this matrix and the soil sit on top of a stone bed, so it's a stable surface for the fire trucks to drive on. But we backfill this matrix with topsoil, grass seed, and grass actually grows up on this. So if you're standing to the side looking down at it, it looks like a grassed area. So I thought for the board's benefit, I just wanted to explain that product a little better. It's not just a paver driveway. It's actually a grassed surface that functions for when emergency access needs to gain access.
And that drains.
And it drains, and it's under drained, and we have inlets along the back too, because that's how our stormwater design layout came to be. We have, with the slopes, we put inlets in there, but it's under drained as well.
Okay. And the fire
So-
department, their recent review provided no negative comments to it. They were satisfied.
They were satisfied because we're providing them access to get to the rear of the building by this means. We'll touch on this a little bit as it relates to the lot improvement requirement and the zoning. Based upon, we conservatively read that to include this in the lot improvement requirement. And I'll touch on that when I get there, but it's, as you can see, the fire road does take quite a bit of the site, so it does have an impact on that number, but again, we're being conservative in the accounting for that, which in a moment I'm going to run through the update on the variance. So as I mentioned regarding compliance, we're eliminating a number of non-compliances, we're mitigating several variances. Based upon our count, we had up to 24 variances associated with the original application, and I'm happy to report that based on our count, we're reducing that to 12. So I just want to go through first what's been eliminated for the board's benefit. And again, forgive me, some of these are going to be repeat from the summary. I just want to be clear. We're providing the wider parking spaces to meet the township's minimum dimension standard of 9.5-foot width for those parking spaces, so that eliminates that related variance. Related to the parking, although it wasn't related to a variance, we are providing the compliant number of EV parking spaces. We're required to provide one. We had some testimony about that. It's now depicted on this plan. It's near the front entrance of the building in this area here. I mentioned that we addressed the freestanding sign setback requirement. We now comply with that to eliminate that variance. With the revised building design, we are incorporating a parapet, which is of a maximum of 2 foot in height, which complies with the maximum permitted height of 3 feet for a parapet, so no relief is required for that any longer. I mentioned we've eliminated, we've eliminated the exterior trash enclosure. There were 2 variances associated with that trash enclosure, which we no longer require. One was for a trash enclosure in the front yard, and one was for the height of the fence around that trash enclosure. With the reduced overall development footprint associated with the building reduction, we were able to eliminate a retaining wall with a fence on it along the rear, the northern side of the fire lane. For part of that fire lane, there was a height variance associated with that fence atop the wall, so that variance is eliminated. We've provided a significant increase in the amount of landscaping from the original application, such that we're addressing all the landscape requirements. So there were variances associated with providing the required number of street trees, landscape shrubs, and foundation plantings. Those were separate categories each. And we're now complying with the ordinance on those, and I'll have a recap of the kind of plantings. But you could see on this exhibit, we're providing those along the frontage and sides, and I'll talk more about those shortly. We have also addressed the requirements for the landscaping buffer and the transition area buffer, respectively, along Route 22 and along Donahue Road. We are providing the required number of plantings in those areas to comply. So again, those are a variance related to those which we are eliminating. With that, there are some remaining variances we need, and again, majority of these we are reducing the amount of relief we're seeking because we've improved those conditions. And by our count, there's 12 total, which also includes the use variance. I'll have a total recap of the variances after this. So here's what's improved generally. Our setback variances have changed a little bit. We had a front setback to Donahue Road, which is slightly increased. We had 49 feet in our original application. That's moved up a little bit to 49.3 feet, and this is where 75-foot setback is required. There's a change on the front setback, and before I get to that, I just want to reiterate, this is the minimum setback, which is, of course, what's always required for these variances, but just to reiterate, we are increasing the setback along the northerly building line to Donahue as we go east to west, and that does increase to as much as 77.7 feet on the west side. So the very corner actually does meet the minimum requirement, but again, we need the variance because where it's closest, it doesn't. Just, again, highlighting an improvement that we've made with the site layout, even if we can't address that variance completely. Excuse me. The front setback to Route 22 has actually decreased slightly. We've gotten a little closer. We had a 54.1 foot setback, excuse me, a 56.8 foot setback originally. We've reduced that to 54.1 feet. However, I do want to note we are still increasing over the existing building setback today. The building presently on the site is 44.9 feet. So our new building will be no closer than 54.1 feet. And again, that's at the closest point, which is the southeast corner of the building. With the reconfigured front of the building, which is no longer one solid wall end to end, and now has these places where it sets back a little bit. We have greater than that setback, and we have landscaping in a lot of those places. So, lastly, in the setbacks, the rear yard setback, which in this application is on the west side of the property, that has changed ever so slightly. We had 50 feet. It is down to 49.25 feet at this little corner of the building here. And much like the front, both frontages, that's the nearest point, and we have increased setback as we move along the building, but again, we're seeking the variance for the minimum setback in each of these cases. I've mentioned landscaping a bit, and there is the landscape buffer conservation easement requirement that applies to both frontages. In the original application, we didn't identify any particular distance for those, but in reality, our application is proposing a minimum of 28 feet on the Route 22 side, which does increase to as much as 33 feet on the southeast corner. And along Donahue, we have a minimum of 25 feet at this corner, and again, this is where 50 feet is required. We have a minimum of 25 feet at the northeast corner, which does increase up to as much as 48 by the time we get to the northwest corner of the building. Our proposed lot improvement coverage has been reduced, and again, that's related to the fact we've reduced our building coverage and our parking coverage. It's been reduced from 54% in the original application to 48% now. Our proposed floor area ratio has also been reduced because we've reduced our total floor area, so that's come down from 0.867 to 0.693 under the changes we've made here. Parking setback to Route 20.
Excuse me, can I
Yes, sir.
stop you for 1 minute? While you're talking about the floor area coverage and the reduction that you've made, according to the numbers that I've got, you're proposing about 104,000 square feet of floor area compared to 28,781, which is allowed after steep slope calculations. That's an incredible overage. Why?
We still require the variance, and we're seeking it in this case. We've improved it.
My point is, what you're proposing is about 7 times greater than what's allowed. Why? Why can't you remain closer to what the land use requirements propose as a maximum?
I don't know if I can give an appropriate answer from an engineer perspective. I can offer it's improved, certainly. It does remain over, as you've noted. I'm more on the site side, so I don't really have an opinion on that either way.
The floor area ratio in the ordinance, of course, doesn't contemplate self-storage because we're seeking the use variance to begin with. Not to mention the layout of the site, but you'll hear more from the planner. This is, the engineer's not able to.
We'll hold off for the planner. Thank you.
Along that same line, is that a function of the number of stories therefore created in this plan? You have 3 stories effectively. Is that what is the largest contributor to the excess floor area ratio?
Indirectly, it's a function of the total square footage, and in this case, it's the square footage divided by the lot area and square footage, so that's where the ratio comes from.
But one of the levels, of course, is subsurface.
Right. But I'm asking if, in fact, that's really what's driving that number.
If there were one less story, yes, there would be less.
And just one other comment. Earlier, you were talking about the reduction in impervious coverage. And part of the gain that you're achieving is by reducing the paved surfaces which had existed previously and essentially replacing them with the building. And then, of course, you have improved your overall impervious surface coverage by doing some of the things you talked about earlier. So whether it's the pervious coverage in the fire lane or the alternative, just by reducing the footprint in the building of itself, you're achieving some gains there. But those comments kind of make sense and jibe with what you were talking about?
Yes, it's really from the building reduction and the parking, that's where we're getting the most benefit in reducing that. So it's a net plus, and we just want to make sure it's clear that it's a reduction over the existing condition.
Right. Thank you.
Which is good, because it's not always common that you redevelop a site and the coverage goes down. So we're happy to report it is going down. I'm near the end of this, so I appreciate the board's patience as we try and cut through all these changes with the compliances. As I had mentioned, the parking setbacks to Route 22 remain unchanged at 28.5 feet, and that happens near the southeast corner of the building here. The setback to Donahue has increased slightly. We were at a 30-foot distance from the parking. We're now increasing that to 32, and that occurs at the northeast corner of this parking lot. We continue to propose loading spaces within the front yard where that is not permitted. We've reduced the number of loading spaces, though we had 3 designated. We now only have 2 designated, and they are located at the southeast corner of the building. Those are now simply surface loading zones. They don't back into the building. There's no more loading kind of dock configuration to that. It's simply just spaces next to that entry point. We continue to require a variance for parking in drive aisles that remain within a proposed front yard where none are permitted, although, again, the quantity of spaces and the amount of pavement has been reduced through this application, so it's a little less than we had before that we're proposing in these areas. And just lastly, I do note there's no change in the building height in terms of the stories. It was the last item on the variance list. For the board's benefit, after all that, I had wanted to just give a simple point by point of the remaining variances, which is honestly the corresponding directly to the summary that's provided in the planner's current memo. Now that we've gone through the changes. So here that list is, and then we'll move on, and I can tell you about the balance of improvements, and we'll get past the variance part here. So the 12 variants I'm accounting for based on that are the use variance for self-storage in this zone. Second, I have the floor area ratio where 0.192 is permitted, 0.693 is proposed.
It's about 3 times, not 7 times.
Thank you for the math correction. Yes, about 3 times. Thirdly, the landscape buffer conservation easement requirement, where 50 feet is required on the frontages. We have a minimum of 25, upwards of 48 feet proposed on Donahue Road, and a minimum of 28, upwards of 33 feet proposed on Route 22 frontage. Fourth, the improvement coverage, where 30.6% is permitted. We are now proposing 48%. Fifth, the setback for the front yard Route 22, where 200 feet is required, 54.1 feet is proposed. Number 6, the setback front yard to Donahue Road, where 75 feet is required, 49.3 feet is proposed. 7, the setback rear yard, which is our westerly yard, where 75 feet is required, 49.25 feet is proposed. 8, the building height, where 2 stories are permitted, 3 stories are proposed. 9, where loading is proposed in the front yard, where loading is not permitted. 10, parking and drive aisles are proposed in the front yard, where none is permitted. 11, the parking setback to Route 22, 100 feet is required and 28.5 feet is proposed. 12, parking setback to Donahue, 75 feet is required, where 32 feet is proposed. So those are the 12 remaining variances. As you heard from those, a number of them have to do with setbacks, and although it was mentioned earlier in testimony, looking to see if I have it on this plan, wanted to pull up briefly my site plan, which is part of the submission to the board, just to, again, remind us all of the setbacks and where those are on the site. And I'm going to be, when my computer cooperates, I'm going to be displaying sheet 4, the layout dimensioning plan of the site plan set. The layout dimensioning plan of the current revision of the plans dated March 8, 2024. The remaining building setbacks, when I take the 200-foot front yard for Route 22, the 75-foot front yard from Donahue, the 75-foot from the western property line, this tiny little triangle right in here is my remaining setback. And I just wanted to reemphasize the rationale for the number of setback variances is driven by the uniqueness of the lot and how those distances measure up. So having said that, I'll put the other exhibit back up, which is A5. Remember how to do that. All right, so I did want to just give a summary, a little more detail on some of the other improvements. And leading that discussion are the stormwater improvements. And we're happy to report that we've made some progress there. We, as noted in our original application, we were compliant with the DEP stormwater standards. We've made improvements, though, and now not only do we meet those, but we exceed those standards quite a bit. And that's for the benefit of really everyone involved, I think, that we're doing this in a couple of ways. In this area here, that wasn't the plan I was going to open up, but this will suffice. Still on sheet 4 of the site plan set. This parking lot here is going to be a pervious pavement parking lot, which is underlain by a new detention system, which is going to provide additional storage for stormwater on the site. We're actually increasing the existing storage on site by 21%. With that additional volume, that allows us the ability to do more attenuation and control of the volume, which allows us to hold back the stormwater rates greater than the minimum standards required. So we're providing that to help in that regard. The net decrease in impervious cover, and as I mentioned, this is over the existing condition. We're reducing impervious cover by 0.14 acres on the site. This reduction, which is being replaced with landscaped and pervious areas, is resulting in some decrease in stormwater runoff from the site right there. Combining that with the additional storage and the attenuation of flows, we're going to be providing significant reductions on peak rates of runoff from the site, which we were very happy with. Just to give you an example, because numbers help, right? A 2-year event, and we're, as engineers, required to design for certain regulated events. The 2-year event, where we're obligated under the rules to provide a 50% reduction over the existing peak rate of runoff. The additional storage we're providing, we have that rate reduced to by 72%. So we're almost at a quarter of the existing rate coming off the site for that storm event. So we're definitely improving that quite a bit. I mean, almost 50% on top of the 50% we have to do. For the 10-year event, where a 25% reduction in the peak rate is required, we have that down to a 56% reduction. So again, we're almost doubling the requirement, and this is what this does is it translates to reducing these peak rates is really creating more capacity in downstream systems, because it's holding this water back when water's running downstream and creating more room for the rest of the water to move downstream, down through those pipes, because we're providing this additional storage. So this is more storage on site than we have existing. It's greater reduction of rates than the minimum we have to provide. So we're very pleased. The 100-year event as well, which is it's often not considered a frequent event, but we all know we've been seeing some significant rains lately. But even the 100-year event, where a 20% reduction is required, we're doing a 33% reduction, which is significant, because it's moving, it's holding back that water, it's creating more conveyance capacity downstream. In particular, I also want to speak to a comment that came up in the board engineer's letter. Comment 15 in section B, a question was asked in particular about the discharge point of the existing basin, which is on the east side of the site. In the current condition, the site drains towards, most of the site drains towards the east. There is an off-site ditch to the north that runs north to south, and we discharge into a portion of that which is piped and then travels to the south in Vossler Avenue. So the question was what kind of effect our development has on it, and I'm pleased to report that we have an improved effect on this because of these reductions in rates that are being realized mainly on this side of the site, but throughout the site. We're cutting down on the existing rates quite a bit. So that additional capacity we're talking about, that's being created in that pipe. That's being created downstream of the site. So, like I said, it's a definite benefit. The reduction of impervious coverage helps that. The additional storage leads to that. I've talked a lot about the reduction in impervious, and now I want to just reiterate about some of the landscape improvements as well, because that's also important to note. And this time I'm going to try and open up the right exhibit.
Before you go on to landscape, and for my edification, you were talking about the rate of flow and the improvements you've been able to make by enhancing the existing retention of runoff and so on the site, and then you're able to essentially release it more slowly over time. Is that correct?
That is correct. That's how those systems work, yes.
So even though you may be increasing the volume of water on the site, I don't know if that's true or not, but even if that were true, you're able to reduce the rate of flow by increasing the retention of the water on the site. Is that true also?
That is true, and one of the things we did review with this was how the site development was also affecting the volume, and we are very close. In the less frequent events, we actually are having slight reductions in total stormwater volume. It wasn't across the board. It's just a function of how the calculations work, but we are at or near volumes. We're very close to the existing volumes, and that's, again, driven by the fact that we're reducing impervious cover, and that's where these volume calculations come from. The water hits a pavement, and it runs off more quickly than if it hits a grassed surface or a wooded surface. So with that, I mean, the rainfall on a site is the rainfall on a site. It's whether the ground absorbs it or not. And we're creating more ground to absorb it, really, by doing these reductions. So,
as you release the water in the way it's being done currently and the way you're describing, you feel there's an improvement to how it will be essentially received downstream? Because we have members of the public here who I'm sure are going to be concerned about the overall water that they receive on their property as it is currently. And they're looking for, I think, just a a common sense explanation of what's going to happen. Am I getting more water, less water? I'm still getting the same amount, but it's coming at me more slowly? Is there any way to describe that?
Similar amount, taking longer to get there.
So similar
Allows-
amount?
So when the rainstorm hits, a summer storm happens, and it quickly fills the pipes, we're still holding that water back longer. And that quick burst runs through the pipe, and then we backfeed over a longer period of time into the system.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
While we're on this, so you probably don't know this, but
I'll try.
Saturday, our town closed Vossler on 22.
That I didn't know. That I didn't know.
In 25 years, I've never seen that happen. It was pretty interesting to me. My first reaction is, your project, how is it going to impact that? You mentioned Vossler in your testimony, and I'm curious, you talked about impacts to Vossler Avenue. Could you just take me back through that? Because it did sound like it was a net positive, that you're going to reduce the flow that would go east towards Vossler. And like I said, we had a closing for safety on Saturday, and you provided testimony. I don't want to put words in your mouth. Could you just restate it?
No, I'd be happy to, because that really does highlight a benefit of the improvements we've made. Yes, we are providing additional storage, and it's for the part of the site that's directed towards Vossler. That's where most of the site drains towards, and that's allowing us to slow down the stormwater discharge from the site. We're reducing the peak rates, which, as I mentioned, we slow it down. It doesn't go out as quickly because we're storing that water on site. So it's an improvement on that existing condition because we're reducing those peak rates, the maximum that's coming out. We're slowing it down.
Maybe spell out the fact.
Yeah, could you quantify that?
For
Quantify.
the speed in which the water travels, and you're talking about, that's what we're talking about, is slowing it down. It's the speed that really addresses when flooding happens, because it's nowhere to go. Is that correct?
That's correct, and the way a storm is, without getting too technical, a storm is modeled kind of like a peak. And what detention does is it kind of blunts that peak and flattens it out. And that same volume is there, it just takes longer to get out. So by doing that, the peak comes down, we hold that water back, it takes the pressure off downstream systems. That's pretty much the way all detention systems have always been thought of, is take that, knock down that maximum and hold back that volume. And that's exactly what we're achieving here. So it's taking that pressure off from when the event is happening and holding that water back over a longer time. And we have the added benefit here, like I said, since we're reducing impervious, our total volume running off this site is very similar. In some storms, it seemed like it was reduced, but it's very similar to what we have today.
And the chairman asked you if you can quantify any of this, and just to the extent of the percentages. I don't know if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, I think John summed it up best. Mr. Kulak said, just remember there's a public here, and I've been doing this a long time. I still grapple with it, and I can't imagine someone for the first time sitting in a meeting, what does this mean? What does this mean to my home? What does it mean to property I love? So, if you could kind of, bring it down to a layman's understanding that someone, is going to be better protected. Is there going to be more water in that retention basin? Just things like that, because what you're saying is going to gather more water, has more area, more square footage, but it's taking slower to deplete. And, how does that work in terms of the calculation? If you could just, run us through what's a percentage net benefit. And then, I guess naturally my follow-on question is, what's the risk that if this cleanout doesn't get maintained, if if something happens to the system, now you have essentially a lake, and that makes me nervous. And I'd like you guys to address how you plan to maintain this and make sure it works all the time.
Sure thing. I'll see. I'll try and do my best to simplify it. It's always a concern of mine, trying to make sure we explain it in a way the public can understand, and it's technical, so it's always a challenge. And I mean, I have numbers that I could cite from our report, which is what I base my percents on. But it's really what it boils down to is we squeeze down the hole that the water's coming out of, so it comes out slower, and that's why we need the storage. In this case, the water, instead of coming out at half the rate, it's coming out at a quarter of the rate, which is even better than we're required to do. And that's, again, that 2-year event. I'm trying to think of another. I mean, if I talk cubic feet per second, that doesn't translate to English for most people.
Let me take a stab, and you can tell me if I'm right.
Sure. No, I appreciate that.
So
Thank you.
when property owners get water on their property, it's usually a function of the municipal stormwater system or neighboring properties' stormwater systems, thank you, not able to adequately store the water. Is that correct? So if neighboring property owners are experiencing water during storms on their property, what we are saying here is we are improving the storage capacity, so it should hopefully reduce the amount of water that reaches their property. Because even though the same amount of water is happening, we can't stop Mother Nature from delivering what she's going to deliver, but we can hold on to it longer to relieve the pressure on the municipal stormwater system and drain it so it hopefully doesn't reach their property to the same extent it is now currently.
That's a good way to explain it, and which is good. I was having a hard time reaching a simplified way to put that into English. But yes, that's a great way to explain it. It's creating more room downstream for everyone else to drain before we drain.
And the second question asked by the chairman was maintenance of the stormwater system. So there's going to be a maintenance plan.
There is going to be a maintenance manual, which is required for all stormwater improvements under the stormwater rules. With the above-ground basin, it's always quicker to see there's a problem before maintenance is even done, because if it's holding water for too long, the owner knows it. They're going to see it and realize there's a problem, because these are not meant to be wet ponds. But maintenance is a required function that we will be preparing, and as a condition of any approval, we'll certainly be providing one to the board's engineer. I know he'd like us to provide one. We wanted to do that just once we know we've locked the system in, so we can give him one that demonstrates the maintenance techniques that'll be required. Pervious pavements need to be flushed out and kept clean. Basins need to be observed, and maintenance needs to be performed to ensure that their berm has its integrity and that the outlet structure is not blocked. So yes, maintenance is a required function under the rules, and it will be performed because the applicant's obligated to do so.
And once that manual is approved by the board's professionals and made part of the resolution, failure to comply with that would ultimately be a violation as enforceable by the town.
Yes, it is, and that's something the applicant will have to maintain.
Steve, would the
perpetuity.
applicant agree to providing a certification to the municipality annually or whatever the manual requires in terms of when it's to be maintained?
There's requirements that, and the municipal engineer is obligated in all municipalities, New Jersey. They have to keep records of all these basins. So we'll follow the requirements on that and ensure the town has a copy of the maintenance manual, and any reporting that needs to be provided will be provided.
What I would like to see as a condition, if this application is approved, in addition to the normal reporting requirements in the O&M manual, is an annual either report or certification from the owner that those facilities have been adequately maintained throughout the course of the year in accordance with the manual.
That could be done.
What causes a system as the one you're designing to fail?
An underground system like this, really, as long as it's maintained and inspected and on the recommended intervals, it will hold up in the long term. Failure can happen from excess silt getting into it and clogging up things. That's a risk with pervious pavement systems. We do provide, as it's recommended in the design standards for these, we provide an overflow inlet. So even if the pervious surface is not picking the water up as quickly as it did during a maintenance interval, maybe it's getting near the maintenance point, it runs off a little quicker, the inlet will pick it up so we won't have standing water in the parking lot. It'll still get into the storage component. That'll function, the storage component under this functions the way a traditional underground basin does, and those have been in practice for decades. And again, it's the same thing there. As long as they're maintained and kept clear of silt, sediment, debris, they'll perform in the long term. Above ground basins, as long as they're mowed, maintained, inspected to make sure there's no animal burrows and things in them that might compromise them. This basin is mostly below ground. It's not as much of a berm basin, so which is a benefit. Those are the kind of things to be cognizant of, and those are all addressed in detail in our maintenance manual. The kind of things that need to be checked and maintained.
Thank you.
And just a production note, we're having complaints online that you both can't be heard. So one of you has to be on the wireless, and one of you can use the gooseneck.
Okay.
There. All right, thanks.
Thank you.
I think you mentioned it before in terms of a sort of a storm event. What level storm event would fill up the retention system?
Our system is designed where it wouldn't be, a 2 and a 10-year wouldn't fill it up. It wouldn't even be filled up in a 100-year. It would still have freeboard, which is storage above that.
Okay.
We wouldn't, under normal function, we wouldn't have a capacity problem.
Okay, so to clarify, on a 100-year event storm, you're still able to discharge at the designed
Yes.
discharge rate,
Yes, we can.
which would be less than what's currently there.
Yes, we will
Okay.
still do these additional reductions even for that 100-year event, correct?
All right, and one last question. At the southwest corner of the property, are there any opportunities, or is it, is there any engineering solutions where you can kind of also retain water at that location as well? And discharge at a lower rate as you,
I had testified about this a little bit. We have limited opportunities on that part of the site, so what we have done instead is we've actually redirected a portion of the westerly part of the site towards the basin on the easterly side. And we've accounted for that on our calculations, so even with that, we're still meeting these reductions. There's still less area and volume and rate going off to the west side, so it's still an improvement over existing condition.
okay, thank you.
Yes. I did want to move on and talk a little bit about landscaping. Just to emphasize that, and here I've put the Exhibit A5 back up because this makes it easier to see everything in green. Following the original application, we looked into the matter regarding the sewer easement along the front. It's an easement with the township for that sewer line to traverse through the site. And there was nothing that precluded the ability to landscape in that area as we found it, so we saw an opportunity to provide more landscape in those areas. And we also reviewed the planner's comments and the ordinance and sought ways to incorporate a significant increase in the amount of landscaping on this site. I mentioned we comply with all those standards, and without going into more detail than need be, I just want to key into some of the highlights. And this is really a comparison of our original application to what's before the board right now. We've increased the number of proposed trees, which includes deciduous and evergreen trees. We had proposed 61. We've increased that number to 276. That encompasses the various street trees you see along the Route 22 frontage, which run along the front of the building, run along the front of the basin, and we've interspersed them along Donahue Road. As I've mentioned, we're preserving a number of trees along the back, and we found gaps in there to plant new ones as well. This includes trees planted on the interior of the lot. This includes evergreen trees that also pop up in the buffer and along the west side. The evergreen tree count itself has increased from 53 proposed to 238 proposed in this application. That's in that total 276 number. There's a number of requirements regarding foundation planting and buffer planting, and as I said, we comply with those. And in terms of, again, just to give you an idea of the counts of shrubs that are proposed on the site, we've increased that from what was 211 proposed in the original application to 954 proposed in this application. The majority of those are evergreen shrubs, 768 of those 954. So the landscape plan provides detailed explanation and a table of compliance with the ordinances. I just wanted to reemphasize the numbers and happily report on the improvement we've made on the amount of landscaping on the site to meet those requirements. One item I wanted to touch on, which was an item noted in the planner's current report, we have included among these plantings a number of native species to achieve the desired and a thriving, successful buffer and the different kind of planting types that the town wants. We do intersperse a number of non-native and native plantings because sometimes non-natives function better in those cases, but we've sought to maximize the use of natives where we can. There are no invasive species. I want to be clear of that. They're either natives or there are some non-native species incorporated in that. But collectively, we think it provides for meeting what the town requires and seeks to have with the kind of buffers along the frontages and the plantings that are required throughout the site. One other improvement I did want to touch on with the revisions we made along the front, we took advantage of a grade change along the western third of the building. And this is the third of the building here where the lower level, the cellar level of the building is exposed at grade. And there's a door that allows access to that level in the loading area. Where the driveway is lower here, we're preserving some of the grade along this part of the island between the driveway and Route 22. And that's allowing us to provide a little bit of a berm in this area of about 2.5 to 3 feet high, upon which we're planting a chunk of, actually we're planting all of our buffer planting, which has a minimum planting height of 3 feet. So I just want to note we're providing this additional berm to go with the buffer planting here, which is going to effectively give you a 6-foot height above the parking area in this area here and give a little more buffer from the Route 22 side towards this face of the building where we're going to have these loading spaces. And these areas are already several feet higher than Route 22, and you're looking up on them, so that combination we think is going to help provide enhanced buffering along that particular part of the building. Since the original application, we made a number of improvements regarding the lighting on site. We've actually changed the arrangement along the front where we had a number of building-mounted lights in the front of the building. We've changed those to pole-mounted lights along the Route 22 side, mainly because we felt we could improve upon and reduce the glare that would be associated with those lights on the Route 22 side of the site by directing them into the site. It was also a more efficient use of the light fixtures, so we've made that change. We've also adjusted, in the controls notes on the plan, we talk about lighting levels. And while lighting operates from dusk to dawn after close of building, it's all automatically going to be reduced to 50% of the normal operating business levels. Motion sensors are going to be incorporated in case a light level needs to come on if someone were to access the site after hours, but we have reduced light levels at night. And speaking of reduced light levels, along the north and west side of the building where we have the emergency access aisle for fire trucks, the building-mounted lights on those sides are normally going to be off. They're going to have a motion detector in case they need to be activated, but the normal position for those will be off because normally there's no activity on that side of the building. So that's just one more way we're trying to minimize the impact of the project on the surrounding. Between that and providing the enhanced buffering, we think it's really minimizing the impact on the north and west side of the site. Just to come back to an item we talked about with the material that this fire lane is surfaced with, we, not to drag the variance list back into it, but we noted the variance for lot improvement coverage where we're seeking 48%. We conservatively accounted for this effectively grass fire lane in that number because as we viewed it, we said, well, it's a physical improvement, so we'll put it in the lot improvement number. It does take up about, believe it or not, 8% of the site. It's a long fire lane. And that's notable because if we weren't conservatively counting it, that lot improvement number would be closer to 40%. So we're not seeking that as the number. We just thought it was worth mentioning for the board's consideration.
There's a spec for that where you can look at what the material is rated at and what the impervious is going to be. What's the translation? I mean, because I know you can't take 100% of the material, so there has to be an offset.
Well, there's two ways we look at that. One is in the stormwater calculation, which is a separate thing, and we looked at that like grass in that case, and it is under drained, so we were a little conservative in the accounting for it there, again, because we'd rather overestimate a little bit and control more water than underestimate. This discussion is solely about the lot improvement requirement.
Took all 8%?
Sorry?
Took all 8%?
We took all 8%. We didn't want to underestimate, so maybe we're seeking a little more variance relief because of that, but...
I'm arguing against you here. I'm saying that, this material is impervious. Granted, it has grass, but there's a cement component to this that you can't take the entire area as grass. There has to be reduction in that. And, I'm not an expert, but clearly this material is not grass. It's not soil. It has a man-made component to it, and you've taken 100% of it against your calculation.
Yes, we've taken 100% of that against our lot coverage calculation. So instead of saying we only have 40% lot improvement coverage, we're saying we're taking all 8%. We're saying it's 48%.
Yeah, I think you're saying the same thing, but in opposite direction.
Okay.
I don't know if I just...
Let the planner decide on this because, like I said, this is a man-made material. You're doing an improvement. It's not grass.
we're calling it an improvement.
The stormwater calculation, I think, is where you're heading. We did pass.
Okay. Just as long as it was accounted for in this, on the safety component here, and the fire marshal is okay with it.
Correct. Yeah, no, I'm sorry if that was unclear. I'm counting it in the town's favor in both cases.
Okay.
Not in the applicant's
More
favor.
conservative.
Thank you.
It just, only because when I looked at it, I said, it's going to look like grass, so I wanted to bring that point up. I think we've covered the main changes of the application. Just other points to note, signage remains unchanged in terms of areas and set, except for the one setback, we improved all the building signage, the freestanding signage.
And that didn't
areas, no
trigger
change.
a variance? This-
No variances, no.
Did you provide a sign packet? I mean, is there any kind of sign?
There was a sign packet in the original application. The only change with the plans is the setback is increased, and the only thing that, and we will do this, there's a requirement to put a number on the, an address number on the main sign. We can do that as a condition of any approval. That's not a problem. We just didn't update the whole thing for it.
You've been really good about giving the board the differential from the original plan. Can you give us the differential in landscaping versus what is existing? You know, because that's really what I think a lot of the board looks at, and I'm sure the members of the public are going to look at, is what do I have to deal with now, and what I'm potentially dealing with? And from a landscape perspective, yeah, this drawing looks like you've done a wonderful job. But what is existing there currently and what's the deviation going to be, I guess, is the question.
I don't think I have the quantitative analysis on that, but I could explain the differences on the site. One number I can give the board, which is worth mentioning. In my prior testimony, and I'm just looking to pull the number out, so I give you the correct number again.
Mr. Winters, let me help you. Why don't you pretend you live across the street from this? Like, live on Donahue. What do I see now, and what am I going to see potentially if this is approved?
From the Donahue side, I'm going to continue to see a number of trees that we're saving now. There's a couple of big evergreens that are actually right in this area here, and I believe our architect is going to have an exhibit that shows a nice perspective of this, and I don't want to steal his thunder. But if I'm looking from this side, if I could see through this, I'm going to see a building, but there's a large amount of new landscaping going here, and it's at the top of this grade in this area. So I'm getting the best use out of this height by putting these trees and landscaping at the top of that. I'm really going to have a hard time seeing this building through the existing and the proposed landscaping. These evergreens are pretty thick right here.
Even though it's a higher building than what's existing?
Well, keeping in mind, it is a three-story building when you look at it from the front of the building. On this side of the building, it's a two-story building. And I was looking at these grades today, and the grade standing here is about 135. Up here, I'm at about 143. So I'm already standing here a story higher. So I'm really, if I'm looking straight out, I'm looking at a one-story building even to my elevation. And now it's going to be behind all these existing trees, all these proposed buffer trees. It's down this little hill. So we're really limiting the ability to see the building, especially in this corner, now that we've set the building back even further than we had and provided all this additional planting. If I go down further in Donahue, today, there's actually a number of gaps where you could see right to this existing building. You could see Route 22 as you get further down. We're filling in all those gaps. We're keeping the taller trees. We're putting in a number of smaller shrubs. We're providing, it might not be the buffer depth, the distance that is required in the ordinance, but the number of plantings required in it are being provided.
So it's your testimony that residents on Donahue will see this building less than they currently see the existing structure?
Even though it's a bigger structure, it's going to be harder to see. It is. So yes, that is my testimony on that.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, if I might. At our last meeting, we asked you to show us a photo simulation of what this building's going to look like. You got it? Who's got it? Okay, thank you.
So that's the perspective from the Donahue side. And the number I was looking for, and I don't know if Mr. Malenik, if that was the one you had, but I'm going to go from my memory. The original, thank you, that was, oh, it wasn't. Originally, I believe I testified that we were going to remove 21 existing trees which were within the footprint of development. We've reduced the footprint of development. That number's been reduced to 12. And those are mostly in areas right adjacent to where we're doing that. Where we're saving these additional 9 trees are actually along Donahue at the back, which is helping our buffer. And we are effectively offsetting those 12 trees with, what was my number, 230 somewhat, 276 new trees, evergreen and deciduous. So that's a number I can give.
And of the 276, 238 are evergreen.
Yes, the majority are evergreen, which helps our buffering case. I mean, in terms of the view of this building, otherwise, we're getting more distant to the westerly side lot line. There already is trees over here, so we weren't concerned about that side, but we're providing even more landscaping there than we had today. The existing building from the Route 22 side, it doesn't have street trees, it doesn't have a lot of landscaping in front of the building. We're gonna have that now, and that building's gonna be set back at least 10 feet further than the current building. So while the bigger building will be more visible from 22, we're doing our best to landscape it and make it less impactful visually. The architect will have, again, some exhibits to show the building from the front. And if we think it's going to show a nice improvement in that when you see those.
Would you be willing to stipulate the plantings in front are going to be minimum heights? What would the minimum heights of the plantings in front that you've added?
We already are meeting the town. The town has requirements for that. All the shrubs have a minimum 3-foot planting height, which is quite high, and it's a benefit.
These look huge on the plan, so they're really not.
Well, he's just referencing the shrubs now. You made fun of the trees.
The tree heights, and I'll see. I think I have. That is not the one I wanted. It's over here. Our initial planting heights of these trees are, in the 12 to 15-foot height range, and they're mostly quicker growers, so we think these are going to take off quite a bit. The exhibit we show is going to show, I think, a 5-year growth on them.
Let's open up to the board. Questions, please.
I just have one question. Are there any generators, emergency power, standby power that are going to be on the site?
No generators, no.
Thank you.
Residents due south that look up at the property, could you take us through the similar analysis that you did from Donahue? What will they see? What will the differential be? Again, we have a taller building, but you have more plantings in front, so what's your testimony to that?
In terms of the height, and it's 3 stories in part because that cellar does become exposed here, and the grade comes down on the site from, on the east side, I'm at 134, and I'm closer to 124, so I gained 10 feet. The existing finished floor elevation of the portion of the building that's 2-story is similar to the floor elevation of the current building, so I just want to, if you visualize that, really the 2-story part is not going to be any taller. It's going to be similar in height to the existing 2-story building. So
There were a number of residents that talked about rainwater issues.
there were.
That's Glen Road, right? Yeah.
I believe so. I don't want to speak from memory, but
What is your testimony on the rainwater runoff situation with your updated plan tonight? What can these residents expect in terms of capture and their new conditions?
I think I've addressed it with the prior testimony, but really the recap is we're providing more storage so we can slow down the rate that water runs off the site, which is going to help the capacity of those downstream pipes, which means they'll have more ability to drain areas downstream of us. We're holding more water back for everyone else's benefit.
Put simply, this proposal will improve runoff conditions.
This proposal will absolutely improve runoff conditions.
But we had residents, effectively testify at the last hearing that they had bad conditions during severe storms. So, you're making a very broad generalization. I do, from what you've presented, yes, I do think conditions will be better. Will they be better on Glen Road, I think is my question.
I don't doubt they have problems now, and there could be many sources of those, but we're doing everything, and we're going above and beyond the minimums. We're providing much more than this property is obligated to provide for everyone's benefit, and we're happy to do that with these improvements.
You're dancing around my question, though.
It's going to be better.
Okay, thank you.
It's going to be better, sorry.
There's no other board questions. I'm going to open it up to our board professionals.
Just
Oh,
one
go ahead.
quick thing about the entrance and about the new parking configuration on the southwest corner. Did you talk about that, the new entrance?
So on you're talking about this part that I just zoomed in on? Okay. We made this a little more efficient. It's a low-demand parking lot, it really is. So we're allowing this to be a one-way entrance up to this point. It allows us to reduce the pavement a little bit. Customers can make a right turn in, and there's parking spaces provided at the storefront. There's parking spaces provided in this lot. The fire truck, and we submitted a turning template, and I don't need to pull it out right now, but the fire chief reviewed it. Fire trucks get access through this way. Loading vehicles proceed straight forward. We're providing, just as we did before on the southwest corner of the building, we had 2 loading spaces that actually required a sort of a back-end movement. I like the improvement we have here where we have spaces where the trucks can pull directly in here. Now, the largest truck size we anticipate, as we previously testified, is an SU-30, which is about a 30-foot truck. There's a municipal requirement to provide up to a 50-foot loading space, and that's why we have up to a 50-foot loading space next to the 32-foot one. We have ample room here to accommodate whatever vehicles we're going to have there. This is more than we need. But it's still, we've reduced the amount of loading because we've reduced the size of the building. So these trucks can pull in here. If they need to unload, they can do so. They gain access from a sidewalk to get to the lower level of the building. When they're done, they can back out and pull right out onto 22. Was there any more specific question you had about the flow, or?
It's just, so somebody loading in the spot on the left there, they go around. I suppose I see where you've got the road striped. Are we worried about them in the flow of the?
I'm not, because the 50-foot space is longer than need be, so I'm not doubtful that people will be able to walk through the back of that, but it's also a low volume, low demand, low traffic use, so this is not, Route 22's out here, we're not going to have those volumes here. We're going to be
It's also
quieter driver. It is, and if those vehicles are coming in, and we do have a truck prohibition on this just because the turn is tighter than would permit the SU-30 truck, and that's okay because we want them coming in from the other way. So if vehicles do decide not to come in the main entrance or miss it and then come in this way, they may be coming in that way, but this is a 24-foot wide aisle, so there's ample room there. But with this layout, I'm not concerned about access to this door. We have 2 loading spaces. That doesn't mean we're going to have 2 trucks there at any frequency. It may happen, but...
Okay, great. All right, that's it for me, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Board professionals, flip a coin. Who's ready?
Probably brief. Thank you. So I just have a few questions. I guess I'll talk first about the bulk variance. I know that the board had raised questions about the FAR requirement. And just for the board's clarification, FAR is really a function of, rather than using building coverage calculations, it helps to also factor in height, so building massing. So it's not just the footprint of a building, but it's the height that so it calculates all together as a ratio of the total property. So basically, how big is the building in comparison to the total amount of land. So that's a way to think about it. So it's not just the stories, it's the building footprint. So to that end, I was going to ask the engineer if he had a calculation of the building footprint, or to make it easier, are each of the floors the same size, same footprint?
Each of the floors are the same size, so the footprint times 3 is our gross floor area in our calculations.
So it's approximately 34,627?
34,629 was the number I had, yes.
So just you know, I think that's probably something good to keep in mind, is that the footprint of the building is almost 35,000 square feet, if that puts into perspective as it relates to the FAR. And that's how you know, you arrive at the FAR variance in comparison to the allowance in the zone. For the, I don't know if we touched on the electric vehicle parking, but what I would recommend is that if there is an EVSE space or make-ready space that is provided, that it be taken off any kind of public. They have like public databases or public mapping that allow people who have electric vehicles to search for the next available spot. And I just don't want this space to be utilized by outsiders coming to, you know, charge the car as a revenue source.
Is it keep it out of Tesla's database?
What was that?
Keep it out of the Tesla database?
Whatever
Now
it
it's
ends up
Ford and
being,
Tesla.
the, you know, charge point or Tesla, whatever, if possible. Can you just clarify if the site is, it has no gates, no gated access like some self-storage facilities have, correct?
That's correct. There's no gated access.
Okay, thank you. Vehicular gated.
Yes, thank you for that clarification. No vehicular gated access.
Thank you. I just wanted to note, as Mr. Winters was providing the number of variances, I just wanted to clarify that in my memo, I noted the minimum conservation easement on page 8 of 10. I noted it for both roadways, for both Donahue and Route 22, and I think that should probably be two separate variances, just to clarify that, because, you know, they are separate dimensions. It's not creating an additional variance, it's just in the list version, it should be one more. So I think where he noted there was 12, there's probably actually 13 total. And then finally, the landscaping. As Mr. Winters noted, their plans have been updated significantly to improve the landscaping, whereas I think they were deficient in almost every category under section 126-191. They meet many, if not all, of the requirements. I did the table on sheet 8 of 12 right now. What the requirement under 191B13-C talks about the placement of the trees, the spacing of the trees, and they do utilize existing trees. So it didn't show compliance in the table as far as the spacing on center of the existing and proposed street trees. So I just wanted to confirm that the spacing has been complied with.
That's a good point. It's more challenging to meet the spacing where we're trying to intersperse, especially along the Donahue side, where we see value, of course, in keeping existing shade trees. We're meeting it on the front. I know we're meeting the spacing requirements there. It may get a little irregular in the back. I do not have that number. But if you would recommend a relief be granted for that, we would seek that relief. I think keeping in mind we're meeting the number of trees is certainly important to note, even if the spacing isn't perfect.
Okay. Yeah, it's pretty flexible. The ordinance allows 30 to 50, so it's not a strict number. And, you know, I did scale it, and the more western portion of Donahue, I think he's correct, that it probably meets it. But I think as you get towards 22, it starts to get deviate a little bit away from that. So I think it could probably be rectified by one or two more trees, one or two more deciduous or evergreen trees, if that could be possible.
We'd be a condition of any approval that the board may seek to grant. We'd be happy to work with the planner to ensure we address as best as we can, given the challenge of trying to preserve as much as we can and maximize what we can plant there. So we'd be happy to work with her for that.
Okay, and as noted, they did update the table for their planting schedule to include which species are native. I just want to let the board know 11 out of the 27 total species are native. So not all of them yet, only 11 out of 27. What I will note is I'll look more closely at that as this moves forward, and I have no problem. I know Scarlett was very, you know, she's a pro at landscaping, and I'm not as expert level as her, but I do
Someday.
give it
Someday.
attention. But I did see that under the evergreens, there's two pretty similar species. There's a Leland cypress and a green giant. The green giant is native. The Leyland cypress is not. They provide very, very similar, attributes, with the exception maybe of the color. A Leyland cypress is a little more like blue, gray, green, whereas the green giant is pretty green. But I would just, I don't have a problem with replacing using more green giants rather than the Leyland cypress. And if the applicant has no problem with that, I think that's probably.
I have no problem with any condition of approval. If I ever lost an application over native versus invasive, I wouldn't be allowed back in the office. So, no problem.
Yeah. And, if the application is approved, I'm happy to work with the applicant to ensure that, the best top-notch landscaping plan is implemented. Yeah, that's currently all I have right now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Bill, we had a wild weekend here in Bridgewater.
Yes,
Talk about it.
everyone is wild. So we'll dive right into drainage. So we heard a little testimony about an existing drainage ditch, and I raised it in my memo. Excuse the typos, I just realized there were a couple of grammatical errors, but there is a drainage ditch that exists parallel to Vassar Ave, and we're very familiar with it because that was a source of damage to the roadway in the aftermath of Tropical Storm Ida. So we have a large series of retaining walls directly adjacent to Vassar Avenue between Route 22 and Hillcrest that was damaged. And we had to spend a little over $1 million to repair that retaining wall, funded 90% through FEMA money, but still, it was a big effort. It is a big concern. It drains a large area, comes down the hill adjacent to Vassar, right to the intersection where Donahue pulls off of Route 22, and then it drains under Route 22. The source of the flooding over the weekend was, if you could picture where that open drainage ditch converges on 22, there is an open pipe that has a trash rack in front of that pipe. That's a constant source of maintenance for our Public Works Department. Every significant storm event, we have debris, branches, leaves, rocks. It all converges on that trash rack, and if that's not maintained every hour on the hour, what happens over the weekend tends to happen. We had 3 inches of rain, the rack got clogged, the water overspilled that ditch, flooded out the intersection. It's an issue that we're very well aware of. I don't believe there's a capacity issue with the pipe that flows underneath Route 22. Certainly encouraged by some of the further enhancements that have been made to the plan for this particular project with the drainage design. I think that actually is going to aid, if this project is approved, that's going to aid in some of the functionality of the drainage at that intersection because of the additional storage that is being offered on this property. So again, it's an issue that we're aware of. It's just off-site of this particular property, but I do have a couple questions that I want to ask Mr. Winters, maybe to further just clarify some of the prior testimony. So, Paul, as I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, there are 2 storm systems along the frontage of this property, correct? Along the Route 22 frontage?
That is correct, yes.
So you have a storm system in 22 that captures the majority of runoff from this property that flows towards Vassar Ave.
That's
where
correct.
it converges with
Majority.
the ditch that I was just speaking about.
Yes.
From there, that storm sewer runs under 22, down Vassar Avenue, into Bound Brook, where it discharges, I believe, into the Bound Brook that leads into the Raritan River. You have a second system on the westerly side of the property along Route 22, where you collect a much smaller area. That goes westerly along 22, down to the Middle Brook, which then drains down to the Raritan River. Are you aware if at any point along your frontage or just say within close proximity of your property, are you aware, does that storm sewer cross under 22 and discharge into any of the southerly neighborhoods, residential neighborhoods? Or is your understanding that that's wholly contained and then it makes its way down to the larger systems?
I'm not aware of where the state system in 22 goes. It's, the description you gave is more or less my understanding. But that is correct that there's two different directions our site is draining towards. And again, the majority is towards the Vossler side.
Okay. And for the board's benefit, I did do a little research into that, and I wanted to ask Mr. Winters because he spent a lot of time on this plan as well, but I researched it as well, and I did not come up with any information or mapping or databases that would show the system daylighting to the southerly neighborhoods. And it's important because we've heard from the board as well as some of the residents that Glen Road neighborhood is definitely a concern, and we want to make sure that if this property or project is approved, we're not going to be causing any issues over there. So I don't believe this is going to be a source of added runoff to that neighborhood based on the way this is laid out now.
Do you agree with Mr. Winters that it will be a net improvement to the Glen Road community?
I believe that there will be a net improvement to the amount of water entering that storm system. If, for whatever reason, in an extreme event, you do have flooding at the intersection, the enhancements here would improve that condition. So yes, I do agree, if this is approved, there's going to be an improvement. There's going to be added protections in place. Now, one question I was going to ask Paul is, because of the concern with stormwater, because of the concern with the amount of water potentially leaving the site, you had mentioned that you, in essence, over-designed the drainage. You put in pervious pavement in the parking lot with underground storage. In your opinion, would there be any benefit to enhancing the size of the existing detention basin to provide for more storage and more protection from the overflow out to Route 22, or do you think that really wouldn't improve or further provide more protection, if that makes sense?
We actually did consider that briefly in the options we evaluated, but given the layout we have and there wasn't an appreciable amount of area we could add to the basin on that side of the site, we just felt it was a better option to provide a new and for that matter, a green infrastructure improvement, which is what the pervious paving system allows us to do, to provide that system there. And it's really an ideal location to site one because it's sort of an offline parking lot. It's separate. It's flat enough in that area we can make that functionally work. Either way, it's additional storage we're providing that wasn't there before. So we're still gaining that storage by whatever means.
And
in this case, it's that system.
Just to reiterate a question that I think Mr. Vescio asked earlier, on that westerly portion of the property, I know there's a small part of the proposed driveway that leaves the site undetained. And I understand that there is a reduction of coverage and resulting runoff that's going to be leaving. But is there any opportunity in that, what I'll call southwesterly portion of the property, to add a small isolated feature? I hate to say a rain garden, but anything along those lines that could be tucked in there along that westerly entrance that could help, just provide the extra protections?
There was a particular challenge trying to set anything else on that site because any system we put in will concentrate whatever we discharge, and there's no existing connection point to anything. The DOT is notoriously more than challenging when it comes to modifications to their systems, and unfortunately there's no connection point today. And not only that, but we have the sanitary sewer easement to contend with, which is another challenge to that. The way we mitigated against effects for this part of the site was we redirected a portion of the westerly part of the site to the east, so that way, as a result, and to the point we were talking about with the downstream system, regardless of where 22 is draining to on the westerly side of the site, less area is going to it, less impervious cover is going to it, less volume and less rate are going to that side of the site than existing. So we're exceeding the standard there still, even without providing anything. And if we had the opportunity, then we could have looked into that, but there was no feasible way to make a connection to put any other system out. So that was a reason why we opted instead to significantly upsize in a meaningful way the storage on the eastern side and just provide all those reductions that we could there.
Okay.
Doing the most with our limitations, really.
Would there be any benefit to putting in a couple of isolated curb cuts and, you know, with the landscaping along the frontage, maybe incorporating some type of, you know, infiltration swale or anything else? I know you have the sanitary sewer easement along the frontage there, which is probably what you're going to say. There's limited space, but yeah. Again, I'm just looking for further opportunities, particularly along that westerly side, because that's the one area, albeit a small portion of it, that's currently undetained.
Without looking closer, I can't guarantee what we can do. I'd be happy to look into it and see if we could work with Mr. Burr's office and identify any opportunities we can to improve it. If we do, I would offer it could be a further above and beyond. I'm just hesitant if we can guarantee anything. If we can, I would certainly be happy to.
Understood. Thank you. Just a couple more questions, Mr. Chairman. So, Paul, you had testified earlier that I think in the prior revision of the plans or prior version, you had 3 loading spaces, if I'm not mistaken. And in this version, that's reduced down to 2 along the westerly side. But I couldn't help but notice there's 3 spaces at the main entrance of the building that look like they're 26 feet long or 28 feet long?
Yes, and thank you, because that's a note that I did want to mention, and I think I skipped over it in my summary. With the reconfiguration of the front entrance on the side of the building and the reconfiguration to provide the fire access, we realized that we had an opportunity between you see this easterly side of the building is kind of at a skew to, it's not perpendicular to 22, it's got a little skew to it, and because of that, putting this drive aisle running north and south here to the east of it, there's an availability to provide deeper spaces here. And as I looked into this matter further, I realized that there are, and this was a question that came up when there was a question that I think the board brought up about the adequacy of the size of these parking spaces for loading and unloading for regular vehicles that want to access the building. We saw an opportunity to provide longer spaces either for customers that may want more room behind their cars to unload, but also there are vehicles you could rent out there, whether they're U-Hauls, that can run longer than a regular passenger vehicle can. So we saw an opportunity to provide that here. These are not large enough to accommodate that SU-30 truck. They're not intended to be. They're intended to provide a little more flexibility, whereas we had a full dedicated loading space on this side of the site, which was probably more than we needed down here in the original layout. It's providing an opportunity if someone does want to rent or use an oversized vehicle to park it on this side of the site, maybe take a little pressure off the loading side of the site. So it's really just a flexibility. They are counted as regular parking spaces and for that purpose, and really they're intended for that use, but if someone has a longer vehicle, we provided a wider drive aisle to facilitate access for those right here, which also helps facilitate the fire truck access. So not loading spaces, just slightly longer parking spaces, a maximum of 26 feet. But thank you for that note.
Two more questions. You also had testified that in an effort to eliminate, I think, 2 potential variances, you eliminated the exterior trash enclosure.
Correct.
That will now be accommodated. We may see it on architectural plans, but that will now be accommodated inside the building.
That is correct, as I think was testified to.
Do you know how that operation will function, or would that be the architect to answer that?
So, yeah, this was actually testified at last hearing by the operator, Mr.
Was it? I couldn't remember.
Yeah, it would just be a function of the rollouts internally and they'll have to arrange for private pickup to the extent necessary, however many times a week they need.
So then the plan accommodates for rollouts to extend out to the parking lot or the parking drive, or the access driveway for easy pickup.
Yes, that's how I understand. They can facilitate at either end of the building. I think they were anticipating the southwest corner when they testified, but I don't want to speak for the testimony given by our operator last week, or last month.
Last question has to do with lighting. You had mentioned you made some tweaks to the lighting plan. What I'm interested in is the sconce lighting that is on the northerly, the Donahue side of the building. I think previously there were building-mounted sconce lights proposed.
That's
They're
correct.
still being proposed, but did I hear they're going to be in the off position?
The lighting on, and I'll just identify for everyone's benefit, there's lighting on this side of the north side of the building and on the west side of the building, which faces towards that grassy fire lane. That will normally be off. There'll be motion detectors, so if a vehicle or someone is to come out the back door, they can turn on, but they're normally off.
That was my question. So they'll be off on motion sensors. So if a vehicle or somebody uses one of those man doors, they'll kick on, but whatever the timer is set for, they'll immediately
Yes,
or shortly thereafter be turned off.
yes.
And that's true on the westerly side of the building as well?
That is the same on the westerly side. So these are 1, 2, 3. There's, I think, 4 lights on the westerly side, which will be on that same operational basis.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Bill. All right, the time is, let's call it 9 o'clock. Why don't we take a 10-minute break? We'll adjourn, we'll come back, and we'll open up to members of the public to question Mr. Winter's testimony. All right, thank you. Here.
Yeah?
Here.
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 Thank you very much. All right, members of the public, now is your time to ask questions. Only questions on Mr. Winters' testimony. And I promise, when all the witnesses are done, everyone here will have ample opportunity to speak for or against this case. I'll give you as much time as you need, but right now, we're only asking questions on Mr. Winters' testimony. So whoever's ready, come on down. And you're Miss Westlake. Good to see you again.
Thank you. Good to see you all as well.
And you're representing an objector, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So, Ms. Westlake, just make your full appearance for the record, please.
Certainly. My name is Rosalind Westlake. I'm an attorney. I'm based in Lambertville, and I represent Arthur's, my apologies, Arthur's Self-Storage.
And they're not in Bridgewater, correct? They're located outside of Bridgewater?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I heard that going through the list of the variances, the 2 D variances and then the 10 C variances that were listed, I was a little confused because I thought I found a few other discrepancies from the ordinance, and to be perfectly honest, I'm not a planner. So I was hoping that you could help me understand whether these would be variances or waivers. The first item was actually raised by one of the board members relating to the loading spaces. As I read the ordinance, for commercial, industrial, and retail uses of 50 to 75,000 square feet, and that's where it stops in the measurement, it says you have to have 4 loading spaces, and they've only provided 2. So I just thought that might be called out as a variance. And that was, I believe, 126-177B. And similarly, under that same section, relating to the size of the loading spaces, they're specifically identified as having to be 12 feet by 50 feet. And here, one of them is 12 by 50, but the other one is 10 by 32. So I would assume that that's undersized and therefore not compliant. So those 2 items.
A question for the applicant's attorney?
Well, not really, because we need to have questions of his testimony. Those are great points, and, you know, we'll take a look at it.
Okay,
By
I
the
guess,
time
I'm
their
sorry.
planner
I just
gets
thought
up
they were
here-
questions
Yep,
relating
by
to
the
the
time the planner
variances.
gets here to testify about all the variances,
Okay, got it.
address it.
Got it, no worries. Okay, so then my next set of questions, I guess, relates to the calculations of the impervious surface and the total square footage, because you had testified that, and it's also on your zone chart, that the FAR is 69%. But when I looked at the numbers and tried to do the calculations, and I could be wrong, believe me, I'm not a math person, the total land area of the property is the 149,902 square feet. And then if you reduce it by the slope measurement, it comes to 114,846 square feet. Is that correct?
Well, the lot area remains unchanged, but I don't know if I'm following your question.
Well, I'm just trying to confirm the total land area versus the total land area reduced by the slopes. So the total land area reduced by the slopes would be the 114,846, correct?
I just want to confirm you're asking this in regards to which of the bulk standards in particular?
Well, I'm trying to identify whether I've even calculated the numbers correctly first.
Your question was with regard to the calculation of FAR.
Ultimately, that will be the question.
Okay, thank you,
yes.
I'm sorry. Floor area ratio. So we prepared the required calculations related to the steep slopes per the hillside redevelopment ordinance. We submitted that plan for the board professionals review, and that was the basis for the reduction numbers we calculated. So just to confirm, as stated in our zoning table, the zone would require a maximum, or would permit a maximum floor area ratio of 0.25 without any reduction factor. With the hillside development reduction factor applied, it reduces that permitted maximum floor area ratio to 0.192. So forgive the long explanation, I just want to be clear upon that.
Okay, but I'm also trying to understand it in the terms of square feet.
Okay.
So if you have the 149,902 square feet for total land area, and if you reduce it in accordance with the steep slopes, my understanding is it's 114,846 square feet. And my understanding also is that the FAR would be the total square footage, which is the 103,887, divided by the total land area as reduced by the slope, which is the 114,846. And when you do that math, I come up with 90.5%, not 69%. So I'm just very confused.
I don't want to drag a tedious calculation out for discussion, because it's been reviewed, and it's been reviewed by the board's professionals, I believe, though I don't want to speak for them. But I believe the numbers we provided comply with the standard. I think our calculation's correct. The floor area ratio on our plans is correct.
Okay. I guess I'm also very confused then about the impervious surface calculation, because when I looked at the impervious surface square footage that is relied upon in the stormwater management, in particular, if you take a look at the recharge spreadsheet, it adds up to 71,409 square feet. So again, if you take that 71,409 square feet and you divide it by the 114,846, which is what I understand the total square footage of the land reduced by the slope requirements, you come up with 62.2%, not 48%. So I guess I'm trying to figure out how did you come up with the 48%? Because I didn't see any square footage calculations.
Well, that description is actually a little bit of mixing an apples and oranges scenario. The impervious cover in the stormwater calculations is different from the improvement coverage as defined in the ordinance. The improvement coverage has, similar to the floor area ratio, there's a hillside development reduction applicable to that. The zoning table we submitted notes that 40% is normally the maximum permitted improvement coverage. It's reduced to a permitted 30.6% by the reduction factor. I testified that we've reduced our improvement coverage, which, as I took a bit of time talking about, does include that fire lane conservatively, is 48% proposed. So that's what we're seeking the variance from.
Ms. Westlake, it sounds like you're applying the reduction to the wrong integer in the formula. You're applying it to the square footage, whereas it should be applied to the percentage.
Yeah, and I just wanted to clarify that, because we've calculated it per the standard, and there is a difference between the impervious and the stormwater rule. So the impervious cover isn't affected in calculation by that, because it's not a bulk standard in the zone, actually improvement coverages.
Okay. So then the gravel that's included in the calculations for purposes of recharge and whatnot is not considered impervious surface for purposes of an impervious surface under the ordinance?
The recharge calculation you're referencing in the stormwater report, that follows a different standard under the stormwater rules to account for
What's impervious?
recharge.
Does it differ? I mean, is the definition of what's impervious and not impervious cover, is that different between the recharge?
That spreadsheet breaks out different categories. We really provided that spreadsheet more for information, because the site happens to be exempt from the groundwater recharge provision, even though, since we're reducing impervious cover now, we really aren't resulting in much impact on groundwater recharge. That being beside the point, I apologize if confusion was introduced by that table, but it's not relevant to
No,
this.
I'm just trying to calculate numbers, because I'm seeing percentages, but I'm not able to understand where a percent came up if I don't see, FAR is based on square footage.
The
and you get a
simple
percentage,
percent calculation.
But I'm not understanding a
No,
percentage
it's
for
a fair
impervious.
question, but I'll clarify. The simple calculation of improvement percentages, the total impervious coverage in square footage,
Okay,
plus the fire road, which we counted conservatively. That square footage divided by the total square footage gives me a percent.
okay,
And the reduction factor that is in the ordinances applies to what the permitted percent is, not what the actual calculation is. And that's it. It's just math.
So the permitted percent of reduction is not based on the slope calculation, it's some other number?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that part. It's not based on what calculation?
The slope reduction, because I was looking at the total land area of the 149, and then the total land area reduced by the slopes is the 114, but you're saying that the percentage used for calculating the reduction in the impervious surface is a different percentage than that which would be used to calculate the FAR?
It works out, it's actually the same reduction. The way the calculation works out, it's just being applied to different factors. One is being applied to the floor area ratio permitted. One's being applied to the improvement coverage. And with our submission, we provided in detail this calculation on the slope stability map, slope stability exhibit, which is part of record. And that lays out how those calculations came up as the basis for what's in our zoning table.
Or how you came up with the 48%?
Yes. Well, how we came up with the permitted 30%. The 48%, as I explained, is just area divided by.
I think you guys are still talking past each other. Ms. Westlake, it sounds like when you did your calculation, you applied the reduction to the square footage. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
I assumed that the square footage of the impervious surface would be important to know.
Right, but the reduction based on the slopes is where you applied it to the total area when you reduced to get to your 114. Whereas Mr. Winters, I believe what you're saying is the formula is that you apply the reduction to the maximum permitted. So that is what reduces us from 40% down to that 30-point-something number that you said. So you're just, it sounds like Ms. Westlake, you have just applied the factor to the wrong number.
I see, okay. Right, I just was very confused by the numbers. They didn't make any sense to me. So just wanted to make sure that I was understanding where you were going with that, so. Okay, so then turning to the truck turning template and so on. In order for the 30-foot box truck to maneuver, they have to enter the first entrance, correct? They can't enter the second entrance?
That's correct. In fact, we have a turn prohibition sign on that second entrance because we felt there was not adequate room for that turn.
Truck prohibition, right?
Excuse me, yes, truck turn prohibition.
Okay, so a sign's going to tell trucks, you can't turn in here.
Yes, in fact, it's on our plan right here.
Okay, do you,
To that to the east of the westerly driveway.
is there any provision for, what happens if, say, a 40-foot truck enters the site? Do you just have a sign again that says you can't enter because you're 40 feet?
I don't want to speak for our operator, but I think we gave testimony about the kind of trucks we expect in here. I think I gave some too, and we don't expect to serve larger trucks than that.
But if one came, you have a loading space that can accommodate up to 50 feet.
We do, so there is a loading space for that, and although we didn't design it for it, it's a pretty straightforward entrance coming off of 22. I can't speak for the success of it, but it's not a highly restricted means of access into the site. We're not anticipating those trucks. We didn't specifically design for them because we're not anticipating them.
Gentlemen, if I can just hop in, you're doing a valiant job with one mic. Can we please use two microphones? Thank you. It doesn't work at all?
Are you able to hear me?
Try it again.
Testing.
All right.
Get intimate with it.
I'm going to leave that to Mr. Milena.
Because
I had
if
no
you're at home on
success with
YouTube,
that last time.
yeah, we can't hear you, and we want to make sure that everyone can hear and is participating. So thank you for trying, and you're doing a great job with one.
Thank you.
So if that 40-foot truck does come in and park there, when they maneuver, they are going to cross both lanes to get out. Is that correct?
I didn't analyze that. I can't speak for it. Because it's an angled space, though, it's not as likely it would need to maneuver through both lanes. And as I testified earlier, it's a low-volume driveway, so it's not a main thoroughfare. So we don't have a concern about that possibility.
Okay. I saw in the new design that two of the corners of the building look like they're basically touching the roadway, the main drive aisle.
We are quite close at two of the corners, and that's just a product of us trying our best to minimize our footprint while making it a little more efficient. I don't want to get beyond that because I'm in architectural territory, but yes, we are very close. We actually have gone forward to put a protective bollard at the one corner where it projects into the parking area a little bit with that in mind. But that is a correct statement.
Into the parking area?
Yeah.
Okay.
At the southeast
But
corner
what
of the
about the
building.
corners that are in the drive aisle? Is there a bollard there or anything?
No, those all fall behind the curb. It was just more practical to put a bollard at that corner based on the placement of the building.
Okay, I see. All right.
It is outside of the drive aisle, though, regardless, the building.
Okay. Is there room for a person to walk between the drive aisle and those corners of the building, or do they have to step out into the drive aisle?
There isn't room to walk, but there's also no doors along this side of the building until you reach the loading zone side where vehicles can park and access can be granted. So there isn't a need for pedestrian access along that side. It's really concentrated on the easterly side of the building where the main entrance is.
Okay. I guess it would probably be a question for the operations, but I would have thought maybe maintenance people might want to have some ability to walk along the side of the building, but it doesn't matter. Let's see. In the originally proposed parking, you had a full circulation pattern, but that's been taken out now, right?
That's correct.
So if you pull into it's called a dead-end parking? Is that?
You can call it that, yes, it's dead-ended.
Okay. If someone pulls into that parking area and there's no parking left, they have to make a K-turn to get out, correct? They can't just do a smooth circular movement and drive onto the drive aisle and...
If the parking lot is full, that would be necessary. As we've previously testified, it's a low-volume facility.
Right.
So
Right.
we're
No,
not
I
expecting a lot to be full frequently.
So then, moving to the existing driveway slope and the corner clearance at the western curb, those are currently not compliant with, or those are not compliant with current NJD standards, correct? They're an existing situation or circumstances?
I'm sorry, you're at the westerly driveway?
Correct.
We are, there's an existing driveway to the state highway we're tying into, and we're trying to maintain slopes equivalent to the current in that area.
Right, but those are not compliant with current standards.
Which standards would you be speaking of?
The current NJDOT highway driveway entrance and exit design standards?
I can't say by the looks of this, I don't think we're non-compliant as far as I'm aware, but we're also outside of the state highway at that point by more than 10 feet.
Would a flatter entrance or flatter exit be a bit safer?
That may be possible. I could review this, but I don't see any problem with this access as presented. I don't think it is any different from the current, really.
And this application is subject to DOT approval.
We would need potentially a letter of no interest from the state because we're not changing the driveways, but if
Phrase that we are subject to DOT jurisdiction on this road.
jurisdiction, that is correct.
Ms. Wisklake, he was brought in not as a traffic engineer, but just as an engineer, so his
Okay.
traffic
Do
expertise is
do you have a
probably not
traffic
relevant.
engineer testifying? I can reserve these questions for your traffic engineer.
We do not, due to the volume of the
Just wanted to put
anticipated
that out
trips, we are not bringing a traffic expert.
Okay. So if you were to redesign the driveway exit and entrance, you would have to comply with current NJDOC standards, correct?
If they were to apply, yes.
Okay. And you would get the letter of no interest because you would not be making any changes to the existing driveway entrance and exit, correct?
We believe we may be eligible for a letter of no interest on this application. We will obtain whatever DOT approvals we need as a condition of any approval granted.
Okay. Your maximum driveway grade for the first 25 feet of the driveway entrance is approximately 10%, though. Is that correct?
I would have to review and verify. I don't have those numbers in front of me.
Okay. Because I was looking also at the ordinance, and in the ordinance, you require a maximum driveway grade not to exceed 5%. So I understand it's an existing condition, but at the same time, we're here with an opportunity to correct a lot of deficiencies. So do you think the site can accommodate a better design for entrance and exit that would be more compliant or compliant with current NJDOT standards as opposed to those that were applied when this was first built?
If any revisions are required to comply with DOT, we would certainly make them. I'm not aware of what extent of noncompliance may or may not be there, but I believe that we are providing a design that functions for our site.
Okay. And I heard you testifying with respect to the water. You're reducing the peak flow, actually.
That is correct.
All right, but you are slightly increasing the water?
No, we're significantly reducing the peak flows from the site.
I'm sorry, I meant to say volume, my fault.
Generally, we are reducing the volumes compared to the existing condition.
Okay, because when I looked at the SWM report, and I noticed on page 14 of the existing volumes, at the westerly end, you have 22,569, and then at the easterly end, it's 49,907, correct?
Is that describing existing or proposed condition?
That's the existing, that's reported on page 14 of the existing volume calculations.
Okay.
And then 2 pages along on page 16 in the proposed volume, at the westerly end, I see you've reduced the volume down to 18,837. And then you've increased the volume at the easterly end over by where Donahue and Route 22 come in. You've increased that somewhat?
So the numbers you're looking at, the cumulative effect is we are keeping near or slightly reducing the volume for most storm events. If you look at the west and east side of the site separately, it may appear that the east side is increasing because we're redirecting a portion of the site's area from west to east. But the cumulative effect is we're between as testified, the reduction in impervious cover and the that change alone is helping to mitigate against an increase in volume from the site.
Right. No, I understand. Actually, I added them up, and I was like, wow, you're actually like 17 cubic feet under in the way you've calculated it.
We're very happy with that increase on this. That we're
I guess part of my question related to the fact that you're actually increasing the volume portion of it, though, on the easterly end, correct?
While there's more volume that will be directed towards the easterly side, we're providing this additional storage for that volume, which is allowing us to produce the significant rate reductions above and beyond the requirement. So we've addressed that volume redistribution by providing that additional storage.
And you just testified that the volume increase is a result of the redirection from other areas of the site. Is that correct?
On the east side of the site, that is correct.
Okay, so then, did your volume calculations include the fire lane?
Yes.
Okay, great. And then what happens if a downstream culvert cannot accommodate the volume that is presently there or being created? For instance, the slightly increased volume for the downstream component of the east end. I mean, what happens then? Does it back up? Does it flood? What happens?
Well, I haven't studied in detail how that downstream corridor functions, but whatever may happen, as I testified, we're providing some improvements on our site, which we believe are going to lessen the effects, at least from our site development, on anything downstream.
Okay, great.
You have not studied. I'd imagine Mr. Burr has, and I believe his conclusion was similar. Your conclusion that he will be making an improvement to off-site conditions.
With respect to the conservation easement and the 50-foot requirement, can you tell me what specific site conditions prevented you from complying with the 50-foot conservation easement requirement?
Part of it is due to the geometry of the site. Obviously, we're a triangle, and we come to a point, and that's a challenge for all development on this site. As I believe I mentioned earlier, even the existing building has setback issues, non-compliances with setbacks. With that, we've increased quite a bit what we've been providing. We've just been unable to meet it. One of the reasons we had a challenge meeting it in part was providing the fire lane around the rear of the building. That alone takes up 22 feet of width. Now, fire lane is health and safety, and that's, of course, paramount, above having a compliant conservation buffer along the rear of the site. But we've greatly improved over our initial proposal by pulling this development footprint inwards to the site, reducing the footprint and impervious. So we're very near the 50-foot requirement. I think we have here 48.6 feet is the, I think I testified to 48, I rounded down. 48.6 feet we have distance when we get to this northwest corner of the building. So we've maximized what we can. Even on the east side, we would have to encroach into the existing detention basin to provide the 50 feet there, and that doesn't make any sense. But it also, is there a necessity to provide that along a basin? That's a question I'm not going to answer, but where we have had every opportunity to, we've provided landscaping, and we're providing the quantity of plants, as I testified, to comply with the planting requirement. It's simply that the buffer distance was where we had a difficulty complying with this particular site.
So if you were to reduce the size of the building, would you be more able to comply with some of those 50-foot conservation easement requirements?
Well, we have reduced the side of the building, and we're more closely complying with those requirements now.
And what if you, well, actually, since we don't have a traffic engineer to testify, I'm going to ask a couple of these questions with respect to the location of the parking and the loading spaces. If you push those back a little bit, you wouldn't have to worry so much about any kind of conflict with the main drive aisle. If you reduce the size of the building, maybe you put the parking and the loading on the side that faces the hospital where people care what's going on. You could probably reduce this, I mean, you'd have to reduce the size of the building a little bit, but you could put the drive aisle in the back where it is now. You could have the fire lane in the front. You would have a lot less conflict.
We've evaluated several options with this site, and really I think we've arrived at a far more efficient layout that's making the most out of what we can with a site that has certain restrictions, a number of zoning restrictions. Of course, we're seeking those reliefs, but we're confident we've made a good improvement with this current iteration of the plan.
Mr. Winters, the questions that are being posed to you now are with respect to the conservation easement, which is a 50-foot buffer requirement, but you testified earlier in the aggregate to all the variances that would be required that would leave us with basically a postage stamp on this property that would be fully compliant. Is that correct?
That's a fair statement, yes.
So if the answer to the question is yes, we could we can reduce the building even more than the 20% that we have since the original application and to satisfy the conservation easement. The next question is, well, can you get the 200-foot easement? Can you get the 75-foot easement in the front for the park? So it will end up reducing to that triangle I think you've prepared on the plan. Is that correct?
Yes, and if you squint, you might be able to see the little triangle here, which is smaller than the 5-by-5-foot concrete pad outside of this door. It's just a function of the geometry of the lot, really.
I understand, but I totally get wanting to have some building setback variances and so on, but perhaps something with like a conservation easement when you're looking at a 100,000 square foot building, perhaps you could accommodate a proper conservation easement by reducing the building to 70,000, which is, I'm asking, if you reduce the size of the building to 70,000 feet, you would obviously have plenty of other variances, bulk variances related to the setbacks and such, but for something such as the conservation easement, you could probably accommodate that 50-foot buffer, no?
I disagree because the 50-foot buffer, you know, it gets more constricting going east to west on the site. And as we've said before, you know, we're taking a site that today has no conservation buffer, and it might not be a compliant one, but we are providing a buffer that's at least, it's more than half at its minimum, and at its maximum, it's approaching the 50-foot on the west side. At the front, it's more than half throughout the whole, and we are, as I noted, providing a compliant amount of landscaping for those buffers, even if the distance isn't there. We're confident that the intent of the ordinances in terms of the planting and buffering is being met despite that.
Okay, all right, great. No, thank you so much for helping me out. I apologize for my ignorance in terms of calculations and whatnot. I do have a number of questions relating to the setbacks and waivers, but I will reserve those for when their planner testifies. Is that okay?
Whenever you want.
Well, no, I just don't want to waive my client's rights to bring up any issues, because I would reserve those for.
Do it with the planner, they'll come up with him.
Fantastic, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Westlake. All right, other members of the public, questions? Hi. How are you? Good. Just your name and address, please.
My name is Ashley Shreddies. I live at 52 Glen Road in Bound Brook, New Jersey.
Can you spell your last name, please?
Yes, I will. It's Cheretes.
And it's a mailing address, Bound Brook, but you're a Bridgewater resident.
Yes, I pay my taxes to Bridgewater. My kids go to Bridgewater School. Yeah, I think it was due to mail overflow or something. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
How you doing? I appreciate all the work that you've done. First, let me say that. I do have a question, and I do apologize to the board if this was asked before, but I just am curious. Is there a reason why the proposed building is still at 3 stories instead of 2?
As the engineer, if you can answer from an engineering perspective, but that's not really an engineering question.
I don't think I could answer that from an engineering perspective. I can offer, and it's only the clarification which I like to repeat, that it is a 3-story building when you take the basement level, which, and I don't know if you could see, okay, good, you can see the screen on that side.
Thank you.
On that westerly part of the building, this grade goes down and it exposes 10 more feet of the building by the time you get down to there. As the town interpreted the height with that, we're required to count that as a full story in our counting of stories. Practically looking at this building, from the easterly facade, if you look at it, it's a 2-story building. From the rear of the building on the fire lane, it's a 2-story building. On the west side and on the south side, it starts out on the northwest corner as a 2-story, and it's a 3-story by the time you get down to that southwest corner. In its appearance, you see the 3rd story kind of emerge out of the ground. The grade goes downward, and you see this 3rd story as you approach the loading area. And a similar thing happens along the front. Once you get about a third of the way from east to west, that grade starts coming down and that 3rd story comes out. And the only reason I explain this is I just want to try and better explain how this is going to appear for your benefit. And practically speaking, and I know where your neighborhood is, and I may have mentioned it earlier in my testimony because I know the chair asked me to talk about what this might look like from other areas. If I'm on, excuse me, on your side of 22, if I look up, the ground floor of the building, which is set from the east side of the building, that's not the cellar floor, but the ground floor is at a very similar elevation to the current floor. So those 2 stories above, they're similar to the 2 stories that you're looking at today. Yes, it's a bigger building, I understand that, but I'm just trying to relate the stories in terms of height and how that looks. That 3rd story is actually going below that current grade. Actually, if you go out on the site today and you drive around the back of the building, it does seem taller on the west side because the existing building does something very similar to that. The west side has more exposure. We're restricted by the grade, and that's how it presents itself with this building layout. But just to give you an idea, that's how it appears. In terms of height, I don't think it's going to appear really taller. I'm not saying it's the same height. I'm just saying it's not going to appear taller from the existing building.
And our next witness is going to be an architect who's going to have simulations where you're going to see how it looks.
Great, thank you. Just another question with regard to trees. So I am not by any means a botanist or some sort of environmental scientist at all. But with reference to the selections of the trees that you've made, is it for aesthetic purposes or more is it like privacy purposes? I guess I want to understand the theory behind those and adding them.
There's a combination of reasons for the selections. In short, we have requirements to meet that. We provide certain amount of plants that are preferred for buffering purposes to block effectively the view or at least help to minimize the view from certain angles.
Your citizens, thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah, so and that's why there's such and I wanted to bring the point of listing those number of plants we're adding to the site, and a lot of them are evergreen. And then beyond that, we have, the evergreen, which keep their, for the anyone who doesn't know, evergreen trees, also called conifers, they keep their leaves or their foliage year-round, so you don't see through them in the winter as easily as you would with a deciduous tree. Now, yes, the shade trees in front, those are deciduous, but which is normal. But at the buffer areas where we can provide evergreen trees, which we provide a lot of on the site, those are going to be year-round screening. So we've, as we noted, greatly increased those numbers, especially on the perimeters of the site.
Thank you. Thank you, board. Appreciate it.
Other members of the public? You good? In front row? Great. All right. We have 13 minutes left. We don't take any testimony after 10 o'clock. If you would like to use those last 12 minutes, by all means.
Mr. Nocella is seated to my right. He's already been sworn in, remains under oath. He started his testimony at the last hearing. Similar to Mr. Winters, I'm going to ask him to update the board on the latest revised plans with respect to the architecture with specific exhibits that you may wish to enter, as has been referenced here.
All right. Good evening. So this plan that I have up here is it's part of the submittal package. It's not a separate exhibit. It is D1A alternate. This represents the new building layout for the reduced building that Mr. Winters had testified to. The building has been reduced to a footprint of 34,629 square feet per floor, which gets us to 103,887 square feet. Over 3 stories, it comprises and it has about 681 storage units. The average size of the unit is about 110 square feet. As you can see, the footprint of the building, we've segmented, we've stepped it back so it steps further back from Route 22 than it did previously. Basically, as Mr. Winters testified to, it labeled additional landscaping in the front and allowed for more area in the back along Donahue Road as well. Just taking you through the basic layout of the building, the northeast corner is the main entrance. That's where you would come first time to rent the space. That's the main office. The toilets are located there, utility rooms. This is the eastern entrance of the building. So when you would come in to bring your items for storage, you'd come in the sliding door here. Similarly, in the southwest corner, southwest end is the loading area that was discussed before that actually enters into the cellar of the building. The sheet D1B alternate is the reduced footprint of the building, showing the 3rd floor and the, sorry about that, and the roof plan. Again, this I know, you saw
I was
that
going to
color.
say, you only have
You saw
about
that
5
color,
minutes
everyone got
left, and I
excited.
think the board's really interested in seeing the
And I would
photo
never,
scenes.
ever tell you guys how to do your case, but I do think members of the public and the board do want to see the renderings.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll leave it at that.
That's fine. I think we kind of ran through the plan. That's really not that interesting. So what you want to see is this elevation here.
Let's mark it. This will be, this elevation was submitted.
The elevation is submitted, the rendering was not
Package.
submitted.
Yeah.
This would be A6.
Right.
Oh, on the mouse. Okay, thanks. So what it would
So
say,
we're marking this as applicant's exhibit A6, and if you can describe for the record what it is and whether you care to do it.
yes, this rendering was retained, we retained a renderer to provide this for my office. This is a view from Route 22. It's a view from the southeast corner of the property. This is the monument sign that you would see as you're coming in from the southeast entrance off of Route 22. What you see here is the landscaping and plantings that are up higher on the berm along Route 22, and you're looking at the east end of the building here. So this is where it says Snapbox Self-Storage. This is the main entrance to the building that I spoke about before in terms of the retail entrance. To the left is where the canopy is. Those are the sliding doors, so that would be where the customers would bring their items for storage in that main level. And as you can see here, as you get further to the left, the building steps away from Route 22. Then it goes a little further and it steps further back from Route 22, and down at this end is where that lower loading area would be. So as you can see, we've done extensive amount of landscaping, planting along Route 22 to aesthetically make the site nicer, as well as offer some screening of the building from Route 22.
The landscaping that is shown is of what age?
It's about in the 5-year range, so it's, as Mr. Winters testified to, there's a minimum height that's going in, but this, for rendering purposes, we showed it a few years down the road. Just briefly touching on the materials, so a lot of people have kind of a preconceived notion of what self-storage looks like. It's kind of your typical metal box with insulated metal panels, and it looks very warehousey. So what we tried to do here is bring in materials that give it more of an office park feel. So there's brick veneers, there's windows that kind of give it more of a office scale to the building as opposed to a large warehouse. So the extensive use of glass, these are faux windows, so you don't have to worry about light coming through, but it just gives the impression that it's more of an office-like structure.
So that's a faux window, so it won't show any light from the inside?
Right. So
it won't
yeah,
cast?
so there's different ones. So here, the one in this upper corner where the retail space is, that's real glass you would see into the retail office. Above it, where you can see the 4 blue doors,
Right.
those are storage units. So those are real glass units that's looking into the building. But then these punch windows, that, if you will, that are kind of at the lower level and upper level, they're not real windows. So there's no, you're not looking into the storage building. There's no light coming out at nighttime. So we did that to kind of give, again, during the day, give you the impression that it's an office type structure. At night, we didn't want to have lights blaring out of the building into the surroundings. So as you can see, even though it is a 3-story building per ordinance, what you visually see at this end of the building is very simply, it's a 2-story building. The lower level is completely buried from this perspective. And as Mr. Winter said, as you move further west along the property, the grade will eventually drop off, and there is a portion that is essentially a walkout cellar level. I can go. All right, so this would be A7.
Describe what it is.
All right, so this view is a Google Street View of the existing landscaping. That's basically, if you kind of came down, I believe it's Crams Road is the name of the cross street on Donahue, at the northwest corner of the property. So as you kind of come down that street and make the turn, this is the view towards the property that you would see. These are the existing trees that we're planning on keeping, and you can kind of see through the opening here. This is our building in the center here. So at this point, the building is pretty well screened. You can see a little bit of newer landscaping here. That's all the extensive landscaping that we're still providing beyond the existing tree lines to kind of fill in any
Marcella,
gap.
do you know when that picture was taken?
It was pretty recently. I don't have the exact Google date on it. It was within the last 2 years, I believe. It was pretty
Is
up
it
to date.
still representative of the site?
As far as I know, as of a year ago, I believe so. I did not compare the two today. No, this is actually, if you came down, this is on Donahue. And it's basically at the corner of Crams Trail. So if you came down Crams Trail, made a left onto Donahue, this is kind of what you see as you're making that left. So I took it because you're kind of looking diagonally right into the property. The medical facility is off screen to the right.
And the windows that we see in this picture, are those real or are those?
Those are fake as well, too. Again, it's again, kind of daytime impression, but we don't want light boxes shining across the street at anybody. And we put a little frosting on, it's like a kind of a opaqueness to it, so you're not seeing like construction behind it, but it kind of gives you that white frosted look that kind of gives you during like, oh, maybe there's a light on. It looks lit up during the day, but it's not a lit structure. And again, regarding the height, again, from this side of the building, at this point, it's a two-story building, and it is very close to the actual heights of the existing office building that's there now. Although footprint is bigger, but the actual height, ground floor height, and then the parapet height is within a foot of what's there now. That's basically it in a nutshell. But all right.
That's it? That's it?
That's it.
Where's the view from 22? Where's the view from Glen Road? Where's the view from Donahue Road?
This is the view from. This is
What you're seeing now is from Donahue Road.
That's not Donahue Road. That's Crims Trail.
No, the camera is on Donahue. It's on Donahue Road right now.
You said it was Crims Trail.
The view, I explained, you come down Crims Trail, make a left onto Donahue, that's what you see.
How far left do you go on Donahue after you make that turn to get to the point where this picture was taken?
That picture is basically at the northwest corner of our property, looking.
From Crims Trail.
But I can.
We were looking for the view of this building from Donahue Road.
That's what's here.
Mr. Sweeney,
This is not the.
Road, but the piece of Donahue Road that's immediately adjacent to or in front or behind, actually, the building. What about Glen Road?
Glen Road is across from Route 22, sir. We showed you Route 22.
With residential behind it.
I want to see what this building is going to look like from that perspective. That's why we asked for a photo simulation from the surrounding area of the building you propose to put up. I'm still waiting to see that.
As I said, that one was from Donahue, this one is from Route 22.
The one you're calling from Route 22 is not from Route 22 where the people across from 22 are going to see the building. You're showing us
I'm showing you what,
the entranceway.
no, I am,
Right by the snap box sign.
I am right at the 22, looking up towards the property. Am I on Glen Road across Route 22 behind the residential properties? No, it's on Route 22.
Would it be possible to generate?
Well, which one, I mean, who, do you want to, specifically am I in someone's backyard? Am I on Route 22 looking at their house? Where do you want it from? If that's what's required. So there'll be houses, so I'll be on Glen Road looking at houses through the backyard across Route 22 up by this building. That's what you want to see?
Corner of the building. I'd like to see the full facing part of the building that faces 22. Look, guys, you want our approval, but you're
Show us what this is gonna look like. You're asking for specifics to what to provide you. You said Glen Road. What Mr. Nacella is asking you is Glen Road is a house. There's houses in between. I know where Glen Road is. We're happy to provide what you'd like to see. Okay. We're looking for specifics. Glen Road. Mr. Chairman, you understand what I'm asking, right? So we're gonna show you an image with a row of houses.
In all due respect, it is pretty simple. He's just asking a view from Glen Road. Okay.
I'd like to see a picture from 22.
I think, yeah.
From 22, I think we're like this. I'd like to see a picture from on 22, just square up, straight on. I mean, you added all these new design elements to it, and I'm not even sure I can clarify by looking at this rendering all of these cutouts in this picture.
Right,
So-
well, we also, the point of this was showing the landscaping that we're doing to help
Yeah, I get it.
with the overall picture.
It's your case, I get it. I think this is a great image. This is helpful, but we're hoping for more, that's all.
So again, this is a straight-on colored elevation, it's not a rendering, but the top elevation is what the elevation is looking from Glen Road to the north. Excuse me, not Glen Road, Route 22, that's the Route 22 elevation.
And it sounds like the board was looking for more from Donahue. You know, so maybe we can be very specific, you know, down to the GPS level of exactly where that rendering was. And, you know, these things, why don't we do another one from, you know, a more easterly perspective? And then you do have senior citizens due west. And I am curious what they're going to see from their nursing home. Assisted living, I should say. And then you've covered 4 different angles.
One of the things you brought up earlier was the fact that the basement would actually appear to people across 22 from Glen Road, right? Because that's where it emerges from the slope. On the east side. Yeah, from the west side, the west side. I'd like to see what that looks like. You've given me no clue as to what that looks like, and we're concerned with what the residents in the immediate vicinity are going to see. That's what I'd like to see.
All right. So with that, it's 10:03, and Joanne, I'm going to put you on the spot. Why don't we pick a date where we're going to continue this? When do we have some openings? April 9th? How does that work with you gentlemen, April 9th? Okay, like in past May, right? Right,
It's just exhibits.
but we have to call that filled, yep. Okay, so April 9th or June? Okay, take your time. All right, so members of the public. All right. Which one you announced that? So I don't-
Right, so for members of the public, this meeting is being adjourned right now. It will continue on April 9th at 7 PM in this room, and there'll be no further notices from the applicant.
All right, thank you everyone for attending. Board members, thank you, and can I get a motion to adjourn, please?
All motion.
All right, Mr. Fresco and Mr. Gasky, thank you, gentlemen.